This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive to put me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 300. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we got a special little treat for y'all for our 300th episode. I don't think we need to dwell too much on it, but I guess it is a certain milestone.
Yeah, we tried to, we did a little bit low key. I mean, I guess, is this low key? I don't know, but we tried to do something different from what we had done for like other anniversaries recently. Like, we did the big thing to celebrate 5 years. Yeah. And then, it was the new year, so we did a call-in, and it's like, well, we can't do a call-in for 300. We got to come up with something else. And we didn't have the idea to just introduce a third mic and not address it and pretend that he had always been there, which someone has suggested the last time, which would have been brilliant. But instead, we had this somewhat cockamamie idea to, do 3 episodes one day.
3 in one day.
And to bring back our alphanumeric system as a bit. Because
people are asking.
The people love bits.
People are asking if I'm doing a voice as a bit. I'm not.
Is your voice shifted down?
I made it. I don't think it is. It doesn't sound like it to me.
Oh yeah, on the stream I can hear your voice is up a pitch.
Oh, it's up a pitch. Isn't that funny? Yeah, it's the reverse of Jimmy. Yeah, hold on a second. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, you have to do something about that. Yeah, our podcast would truly be doomed if that was what Dimitri's voice sounded like. It is like, one of our greatest saving graces, that radio ready voice. So
how is that?
Does that certainly lack.
Does that still
as
sound?
I've been told many a time.
Is that still light right now? Wow, helium. Let me see how that. Yeah. Oh wow, no.
Is it better now?
Apparently not.
I don't think I can hear anything.
That's very weird. Very weird. It was lagging.
No, I could hear you now, or like on the stream I could for a second.
You could hear me normally?
I think so. Yeah.
It's wait, no, I think I think I'm normal now.
You sound like you're doing a Khalid voice. Come on, give me a break.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure my voice is normalized. I reset my microphone. Who knows? There's always
well, that's
the jinn are attacking.
Episode is like you got to pitch your voice up, and I'm gonna pitch mine down, and we'll do impression. But I feel like that we'll just end up like fighting at the end of that if we do impressions of each other.
That would be funny if we just pretend to be each other for like 6 hours. That would be pretty good.
But you're gonna get like we're both gonna get pissed off at each other because you're gonna be like, I wouldn't say that, and I was like, I don't sound like that. So we can't do that. It's not healthy. All right, so Chupacabra.
Chupacabra. All right, so just for everybody to understand, to place us today, we're doing 3 episodes today in a row, like back to back, right? Going B2B with 3 episodes for 300. This first one is going to be right here on YouTube where y'all are right now. And we're gonna spend an episode's worth of time. Maybe not as normal, maybe not like a normal episode length of time, but a decent amount of time on Chupacabra. Then we are going to pop over to the Patreon feed. So for all you subscribers out there, you want to keep listening to episodes 2 and episode 3 that are going to happen right after. You can go to patreon.com/subliminaljihad. And we will be there for the duration, doing 2 more, full-size episodes on different topics, kind of totally different topics. I didn't realize we want to be
connections, but
there's going to be
obviously, thinking about them at the same time. Yeah.
More than you would think.
Yeah. It was a weird situation because we've never done this before where it's like I'm preparing like 3 different topics. So it was kind of, like hell on wheels for a little bit, but I think it worked out well.
It's a little bit like, I guess, sometimes the way we do Q&A episodes where we realistically only end up getting to like 3 questions, but we kind of
Yes, that's true. I did have that thought as well. This is kind of like a Q&A. Like, right. Because sometimes we do take 2 hours to do a single question.
Yeah. But I think we did put prep time into these.
We did much more research than we, for the Q&As, because we always use it as an excuse to be like, well, I can't research because there's so many questions.
Well, it's supposed to be a surprise.
We do a little bit.
It's supposed to be raw.
Case, yeah, exactly. But in this case, we came up with topics that we think kind of express maybe not the essence of SJ, but kind of hit on sort of core SJ themes.
Yes. Kind of popular subgenres of, different types of episodes, because we kind of have like a genre cycle that we kind of go through with like different types of episodes. We try not to cluster them.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want to have like 2 cryptid eps back to back, 2 music eps back to back, we try to break it up a little bit, which, probably, I don't know how good that is from like a sort of podcast marketing perspective, because I feel like people just like want the same thing all the time. But that's not how we do things here at Subliminal Jihad. We are eclectic.
No, it is a vast buffet of different cuisines. Yeah. And so, today part 1 is going to be cryptids. Part 2, I'm going to be cryptic about it. But, part 2 is going to deal with an interesting music figure. And part 3 is going to deal with the intersection of Hollywood, true crime, and high espionage. And maybe a rencontre. So, good spread there. Actually, in a way, like maybe all 3 of these episodes are kind of about the Phoenix program in one way or another. Now that I think about it,
there are definitely links. There are definitely links, but we'll draw them as we go. But let's get into Chupacabra.
I think it's El Chupacabra, despite having an A at the end of the name, right?
Yes, it is. Well,
Chupacabra
I guess
sort of male coded. I guess.
Yeah, that's true. It's not Chupacabro. Yeah, I mean, Chupacabron. Cabron. That is related, right?
That's a slur.
Oh,
well, there might be a root. I mean, cabron is like I forget exactly what it's definitely a
it literally
dirty
means
word.
A male goat.
Okay, yeah.
So there you go. I think that, and I think that
like
was
asshole or something like that,
Well, I think Chupacabra was kind of coined to have these sort of like connotations, like kind of like, I mean, it means like literally goat sucker,
right?
But because it has a sort of the word goat has that polysemy, right? That it kind of had this sort of sexually suggestive, like kind of a playful connotation. That's sort of like why it was coined and why it had the popularity that it had, right? You could have called it something much more boring and much less interesting.
There's even for English speakers, there's something so fun about Chupacabra. Like, it's especially, you got to compete with things like Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch. These are all kind of like, very memorable names.
They're phonetically interesting. Yeah,
they are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mothman. It's exciting.
Right. So. It harkens back to the whole thing. Like, that Mothman was almost called Batman because he was actually more bat-like. It's like we can't call it Batman. It's like kind of it's lame. It's a copyright problem. You'll never know what anyone's talking about. You think they're talking about Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So you found a lot of really good sources about Chupacabra studies, of which
yes,
every cryptid episode, I'm always impressed by like the amount of scholarship, both amateur and professional. I guess I'm good
at this. I don't know. I just have like a knack for
you do have a gift.
Finding the angle on the cryptids that's gonna be good. But
I just waited to see what the workflow would be filled with this morning. I woke up like a little kid on Christmas Day, and it was just. like, just like incredible academic articles about like colonialism and the Chupacabra. What is it? Culturas imperiales, governing spirits, imperial secrets, vampires, and nationhood in Puerto Rico. That's definitely where I want to take this conversation about the Chupacabra, because some people, I think people know that Chupacabra sort of originates from Latin America, but they might not know that it specifically emanates from the U.S. territory and Caribbean island of Puerto Rico, right?
Yes,
and which it's kind of like a quasi-American. We saw Puerto Rican superstar Bad Bunny win at the Grammys last night. He's going to be performing at the Super Bowl this coming weekend. And,
right.
Yeah. So he said things about ICE, bad things about ICE, which was good. And of course, Puerto Ricans, like, maybe we'll touch on like the broader history, but of course, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, but they are not a state, so they kind of have limited representation in our government. And you can say that there's been a lot of stuff in Puerto Rico, like throughout the 20th century. I think America came into possession of it after the Spanish-American War. A lot of military testing and weird things. I think we brought up a couple months ago the kind of sus like eugenics sterilization programs that a lot of esteemed foundations were running in the early 20th century in Puerto Rico, like unwittingly, like sterilizing like young women without consent. And there was definitely like bombing, like U.S. Navy bomb testing, maybe chemical testing, things like that. So that's something we have to keep in mind, like immediately when we think. That's like one of the first things that jumps into my mind when I think, the Chupacabra pops up in Puerto Rico. Islands are always a funny place for like a cryptid to pop up, right?
Yeah,
it's not like
the Caribbean has an interesting history in general because like it doesn't really have like an indigenous like population, right? Like it doesn't have that. It like is sort of settled, and like slaves obviously were brought there. But
for the most part, the native inhabitants of most. I know this is definitely true in the case of Cuba. I think I read about that like when I was there. Is that and some people don't know that compared to like Mexico, Central America, South America, it's almost more like North America in that way, where in fact even less so, where most of the natives were either killed or died through disease or were like deported as slaves to other colonies. And so in a lot of these places there's like almost no indigenous like population, like less than North America, because they all were either kicked out or killed or died or something like that. So you do have a mixture of a population usually of like a kind of Afro-Caribbean population. And then, a mixture of like Spanish people and maybe French people and things like that. So
and it's definitely something that I in reading about this, something that I noticed that like especially compared to like our other cryptid episodes, it definitely did stick out to me that like the sort of discourse around the Chupacabra was like in my assessment like way more racist, I thought.
Like there's a kind of like Yo Quiero Taco Bell vibe to a lot of it.
Yes, I felt that there was like a kind of like the idea that people believing. I think a great example is this sort of book on the Chupacabra. This is one of the sort of most complete like books that I think it might be the only book that is dedicated fully to the Chupacabra issue, which is by this guy Benjamin Radford, who has kind of set himself up as like the lead debunker of the Chupacabra. And I think like kind of the best example of what I'm talking about is his discussion of one of the biggest kind of eyewitness reports of the Chupacabra, one of the most famous sort of encounters of the Chupacabra. And the way that he talks about it, and he advances a theory that you'll read about, like it's not only in the sort of Wikipedia article on the Chupacabra itself, but it's also in the Wikipedia article for the movie Species, which is about, the sort of putative connection between these two things, which is that the Chupacabra was this sort of he actually cites the work of Elizabeth Loftus and says it was like a false memory that was created in the minds of these naive people because they had seen the movie Species, and they believed that these events from the movie were happening in real life. And that is why, like, the alien in the movie Species has spines on its back, and Chupacabra. So let me read you actually what he says, because I think it's very interesting, like how what he says and like the evidence that he is adducing doesn't really support his claims. Okay. So, I'll try to find the key part here. It's called like what species is the Chupacabra, because he, sorry. Yeah. I thought I had it keyed up, but I don't know if I... All right. So the Tolentino Eyewitness Report, a closer look. To solve a mystery, you often need to understand where it came from to seek out the original sighting that spawned the rest, the case zero. The best Chupacabra sighting in history came from a woman named Madeline Tolentino of Canovanas, Puerto Rico. It is the most important Chupacabra description on record, not only because of its detail, but also because it is the quote-unquote original Chupacabra depiction upon which the most famous depictions of the creature are based. As Scott Corrales, he wrote another earlier book on the Chupacabra and Other Mysteries, and he cites him a lot in this book. The first descriptions of this mysterious creature came about 6 months into the mutilation epidemic. In September, sightings by Madeline Tolentino, a housewife of Canovanas, a city to the east of the island's capital, San Juan, and others gave it a form and a name. Most accounts of Tolentino's encounter offer only a brief summary of her description, but to really understand her account, we must examine it in full. She claims to have seen the creature near her mother's house during the second week of August, 1995. In an interview with members of the Puerto Rican Research Group in 1996, Tolentino said the bipedal animal had dark gray or black eyes that were damp and protruding, running up to its temples and spreading to the sides. Its height was 4 feet, more or less. At the time, it was walking like a human on both legs. Its arms were drawn back in an attack position, as though it were a TV monster. It has 3 long, skinny fingers. Its arms were also long. Its hair was rather short and close to its body. Rather well combed, in fact. It had some round things on its body, and the region seemed ashen, as if something had burned it there. The burn mark revealed pinkish-purple skin, as if the top layer had fallen off. As for the creature's legs, Tolentino said, they were very long and skinny, and I could see 3 separate toes, like a goose's foot, that has a little thing between its toes. For a nose, it had 2 little holes, and its mouth was a slash. It was closed. At no moment did it open its mouth, so I saw neither fangs nor teeth. I noticed something on its lower back. It looked like it had feathers. Like feathers, but flat on its back. At no point did they rise. In an interview conducted by Mark Davenport in February 1996, Madeline said the feathers became erect and moved rapidly from side to side. The feathers were joined by some sort of membrane, and it looked reddish, like a mixture of copper with brown and other colors. So she says she got down on the floor to see if it had genitals. It had nothing at all. It was plain and sealed. I laughed and I said to my mother, what the heck is this? Does it defecate through its mouth after it eats? It made slow, robot-like movements as if being controlled by someone. Then he kind of advances this whole theory about the movie Species, kind of claiming that this had an influence here. Syl is the name of an alien creature played by Natasha Henstridge in the sci-fi horror film Species. Did you ever see this movie?
I remember it. It was kind of iconic in like the early 90s because Natasha Henstridge she was like this hot like alien. Like, she was kind of skinwalking like a beautiful blonde woman, and she'd always seduce a guy and then, like, make out with him, and I feel like her, like, tongue would, like, shoot through the back of his head or something like that, and she would, like, kill them by, like, making out with them.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, oh my God, But it's been years since I saw it.
It was, I watched it a little bit, relative to this. Like, I kind of, like, skimmed through it just to see kind of, like, what Syl looked like, because, like, his whole idea is that, like, as I said before, like, and as he'll say explicitly, like, that she saw Species and somehow she thought Species was real, and that she was and that Syl was in her yard, which, like,
where have we heard this before? Like, a weird thing about, you know what it was? Brian De Palma's verite, like, mockumentary anti-war epic Redacted from 2007, which, was like, he filmed it in a way that it was like Blair Witch style, like it was shot by like a unit of Marines, and then they commit a horrible like home invasion rape of like a teenage girl and all this other stuff. And then a clip of that, of like the simulated raid, was shared around the internet, and allegedly some British guy who was like an Al-Qaeda sympathizer this is allegedly, saw the video, thought it was like real live leak footage of like U.S. war crimes. And then I forget if he did a bombing or like a stabbing attack in somewhere in Europe. And then it was like discovered that he had allegedly just thought it was. In that case, you could almost see like a little more of because it's shot to look real or what, and it was based on something that did happen. But then that was used to like kind of blacklist Brian De Palma from like from working with studios, or like it iced him out because they're like irresponsible filmmaker Brian De Palma like made something that depicted real U.S. war crimes. But then surprisingly some like MK'd fucking terrorist guy like allegedly is inspired by that to go like do a terrorist attack. So now we have to ban him forever and like shame him for doing like, it's kind of weird. I'm always skeptical of the natives. They don't understand that movies are fiction, or some shit like that. Especially this, like it's a monster movie with like 90s CGI. Like, what do you mean she thought it was real? Also, like, what did she see? Like, she hallucinated?
Exactly. And, like, I remember, I mean, people have it on recording. They can go back and listen to it. Like, her, Syl, like, she has spines on her back. That's true. But they do not have a connecting membrane. They do not change color. And, like, they do not, they're not down, and they don't look like feathers at all. They look like spines of, a design by the designer of Syl, the xenomorph, like, type alien.
Oh, right. More of
That's kind of what they look like.
Reptoid insect kind of thing, like a shell.
Yes.
Kind of a thing. Yeah.
So, like, so let me read what this. What it reminded me of a little bit was our goblin episode, where like we talked about this sort of idea that the Hopkinsville goblins were owls, and that these people who like lived in the woods, and like saw animals all the time, and were probably familiar with what owls looked like, somehow mistook owls for like floating goblins. Which
the only I guess people with that must have been some good moonshine or something, or they dosed the water supply with LSD or something. Like you almost have to say that to make that believable.
To be that. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
They were gassed with like BZ or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, he talks about how, Syl was designed by H.R. Geiger, known for his eerie, bizarre, and often erotic art. That's important, too, I think, because, like, another thing he says is, like, Syl also has no genitals, just like the Chupacabra, as described by Tolentino. It's like, well, I think that there's no way anyone could watch the movie Species and come away thinking that Syl had no genitals. Like, she has sex in the movie and
has like a honey
gives
trap.
birth. Like,
okay, yeah, I forgot about that part.
So it's like, and like, also I feel like Syl has like a butt too, like, so the whole like defecation thing, like, it's obvious where Syl, if she were to defecate, would defecate from, I guess.
How much? I kind of forget what she looks like in full alien form. Like I kind of just remember what it more or less.
She looks basically like kind of like a more like sort of like if H.R. Geiger like designed like a woman, kind of like it's like a xenomorph, but like she has like breasts and like a belly button, and like she, if you like look her up, you see like she's like very like kind of like erotic, as he said. It's true, like she's kind of still has that sort of sexuality, even though she's also this like weird sort of like alien creature. She like kind of looks like a mix of a xenomorph and like just like a hot woman, I guess. It's kind of like what.
I do just want to point out, because I think we might have overlooked this in some of our recent episodes, but did you know that H.R. Geiger was like friends with Paul Krasner, Timothy Leary, Alan Watts, like basically the whole like merry prankster kind of crew?
No,
I guess.
I don't actually know anything about him other than like the fact that he designed the alien from Aliens. I didn't even know that he designed the Species alien until I started reading for this episode.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I feel like I'd seen him pop up. Didn't he design like some of the sort of aliens for Jodorowsky's Dune that was never made or something like that? Like he got H.R. Geiger to do like mock-ups for it. I don't know if I'm misremembering that, but I'm pretty positive that H.R. Geiger pops up in Paul Krasner's memoir. And they had some kind of wacky run-ins, and they like knew each other. But I'm kind of interesting. 1969 educational film about LSD. Paul Krasner was like friends with H.R. Geiger, and I don't know. Like it might be interesting to look more into, because he's so kind of iconic. The creator of the Necronomicon collection. That's what it's. There's an article here about him. He lives in Switzerland. Yeah, and he was his. Let's see. Yeah, Jerry Rubin, Ram Dass. Like, he was friends with all these people.
My argument with this is that he's not actually super relevant, because let me read what this skepto science man says. So he says the similarities are striking when you consider all the possible body features and morphological characteristics Chupacabra form from those of other animals. Only a few animals in the world are bipedal. Mm-hmm. I mean, every single bird comes to mind. I guess like raccoons and stuff aren't bipedal, like neither like groundhogs and stuff like that, but they kind of like can stand on two legs. Bears can kind of stand up on two legs and like waddle around. Yeah. You know, it's not so crazy. Like for every single bird, I think comes like, you know, there's even like lizards that kind of do that thing on two legs where they run on the water. You ever see that? Like the water running lizard. Yeah. So like they kind of do that on two legs. Like it's not like so crazy to have an animal that like might not be like bipedal per se, like in the way the humans are, but like what she described a Chupacabra as doing doesn't necessarily seem to. I mean, a kangaroo. She compared it to a kangaroo. Kangaroos are bipedal. There you go.
Yeah.
Like,
you're right. A lot of birds.
And this is like, you know, I'm the hard-nosed, like real scientist who's coming in to debunk this, and I'm like, give me a break here. So he goes on to saying, most animals have tails. Neither Syl nor the Chupacabra does. I mean, like, I guess the creatures I feel like tails, like maybe in some animals are less prominent than in others, or like you might not like recognize it as a tail. I don't know. The creature's eyes could have been just about any shape, size, color, and location on the head. Syl and the Chupacabra are identical and unlike any other animal. I don't know like if that's really actually true, because like it seems like the Chupacabra has like these luminescent, glowing eyes that like are kind of like fire, like almost like Mothman eyes,
or Dogman like.
Yeah, where Syl doesn't really, and like kind of like a combination of the Mothman, like a gray sort of, and Syl doesn't really have the eyes of a gray. The signature pattern of spikes in the Chupacabra's spine, I already talked about this, where it's like it almost seems more like kind of a Spinosaurus or something, where it has like a membrane, or like it's almost feather-like rather than what you see in Syl, where it's like these spines, right? It's kind of like, he even uses a picture that he drew himself of the Chupacabra and compares it to Syl and says like, look how similar they are. It's like, well, you drew that. This
doesn't sound incredibly strong to tie it to like one movie that came out.
Well, this is what really blows my mind. Like, so he says, the influence of the Species film on the popular depiction of the goat sucker is unmistakable. All right, so I don't think it's unmistakable, whatever. But how did the movie monster come to be seen as the dreaded Chupacabra? Could Tolentino have made the leap from seeing an alien in a movie theater to seeing it stalk the Puerto Rican countryside? In analyzing the influence of Species on Puerto Ricans' concept of the Chupacabra, it is important to recognize that the film was designed to be very realistic. Great pains were taken by all involved, from the screenwriter to the director to the special effects staff, to make the film, and especially the starring creature, as realistic as possible. All right, whatever. Species is not set in some galaxy far, far away, nor in replicant-ridden 2019 Los Angeles. The film is set in the then present day of 1995, and the very first scene of the film is of a real radio telescope, in Puerto Rico, no less. The Arecibo Radio Observatory. For people living in Puerto Rico at the time, the film was essentially set in their hometown, and at the time they were seeing the film. The connection to real Puerto Rican lives may have seemed quite real to some. It also helped that Species, a film with more gore than most science fiction films, was not marketed as a horror film and thus attracted a larger and more diverse audience than a straight horror film would have, aimed at a largely young male demographic. Blah, 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 he talked quotes about how they wanted to have a broad audience, et cetera, et cetera. He talked to, about Syl's spikes, how they designed it, how it's scary. Even the Species story itself heavily borrows from reality and plausible science. There is, in fact, a government project to search for extraterrestrial life, the SETI program, which has used Puerto Rico's Arecibo Observatory. Scientists have, in fact, sent out coded messages to whatever intelligences may be out there, giving information about humans. Screenwriter Feldman says he wrote Species as a thinking person's horror film. Blah, blah, blah. So, to me, there is like a little bit of a conflation happening here where he's saying that like because people later would interpret the Chupacabra phenomenon as something come from outer space, or say like, oh, maybe it escaped from a lab, like because that is like a sort of science fictional trope, which certainly does not just just originate from species, but had certainly predated that. That's different from saying that like the actual experiences themselves were conjured by seeing species, which is what he proceeds to say. So listen to like his interpretation of this versus like with the evidence that he actually has. He says, Madeline Tolentino stated that she saw the film Species before her Chupacabra sighting. Okay. So, wow. Okay. Well, she saw it before her Chupacabra sighting. Maybe that's, the smoking gun appears in a March 1996 interview with Lucy Pla and Jose Manuel Rodriguez. It is reprinted as Chapter 5 in Scott Corrales' book, Chupacabra and Other Mysteries. Tolentino states that she saw, quote, a movie called Species. It would be a very good idea if you saw it. The movie begins here in Puerto Rico at the Arecibo Observatory. There's an experiment going on in the film, a girl in a glass box as a result of the experiment. When they try to kill her with poison gases, she breaks the box with supernatural strength. What came out from inside the girl made my hair stand on end. It was a creature that looked like the Chupacabra with spines on its back and all. The resemblance to the Chupacabra was really impressive. So from the way that like I read that quote,
she already knows about a thing called a Chupacabra and what it looks like, and she thinks the movie is capturing that well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. She's saying like, "Wow, when I saw this movie, I couldn't believe how similar it was to the Chupacabra that I saw."
So she had already seen the Chupacabra before she saw the movie.
Opposite of what she said, right? So like to say, I mean, I agree that the Chupacabra looks weird. I'm not even necessarily saying like who knows like what happened, but I think that like it is like kind of a testament to what I'm talking about, where there's sort of this complex that is like obscuring like anyone's ability to get to the reality of what happened, because like people are supplying this idea of like these naive, superstitious, non-white people, right? Who are, like hallucinating Chupacabra because they saw a movie, like whether like she saw anything or not, like, maybe she lied, whatever, like that, like that's like a different like matter, right? Yeah. But like this explanation, I'm just saying like this attests to how like bizarre the discourse around this cryptid is, like in particular, where there's this sort of like condescension, like that is, I think, it does exist with other cryptids as well, but something with the, the cryptids that we talked about in the past, things like Bigfoot, even, the Loch Ness Monster, stuff like that, like those are cryptids that, like, they are said to live in predominantly white countries, in the Western world, right? Yeah. Like where even if they do exist elsewhere as well, as we've talked about, of course, right? But certainly, like, it's not something where you can say like, oh, well, white people don't believe in this, right? So therefore, and it's kind of the same thing with the Hopkinsville goblins, where it's like, oh, these hicks, right? It's a little bit of a different,
or the kind of mountain men in the Pacific Northwest who are kind of like yokel hippie. Sort of types, and even vampires. Like if you think about sort of the great imperial Europe in like the end of the 19th century, and you see it like depicted in the movie, like Nosferatu and everything, that like Transylvania is like, that's like the furthest frontiers of like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and is like the backwoods of Europe. It's very like hard to get to, and there are these strange people there that have these old traditions, and et cetera, et cetera. So you see it kind of like there's always been an element of that, even within like Euro-American context with cryptids. But then you get that dial gets cranked up to like 11 when you're dealing with like the global South. It's like oh, they saw like a 90s. Like bad CGI thriller and got psyoped by it. Like, I mean, this movie might be a psyop, but not in the way that this guy's talking about. I feel like it's more likely that it was meant to shape already existing narratives or discourse around Chupacabra. Because, I mean, we should mention, like, the main kind of the effervescence of like Chupacabra encounters or incidents or whatever is something that pops off like basically in 1995, right? Yeah. Yes.
Although there had been like precedents, right? There was like the Vampire of Mocha, which was another like sort of similar vampire incident that happened in 1975, right? Which a lot of people kind of relate to the Chupacabra.
Yeah.
So like certainly like again, so the whole idea that like this, and also like there was like a sort of rash of like goat sucking incidents where like people would find their goats exsanguinated, right?
Yeah.
And like with like puncture wounds, like kind of like cattle mutilations, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Actually, can I just read real quick the Chupa's timeline on princeton.edu/
Yes, this
Chupa?
is an amazing website that was made by like a Puerto Rican student at Princeton University, like during the time of the Chupacabra sort of collapse.
It's amazing.
To use the keel. Yeah, and it's like
the side
an
banner
awesome, like,
is a bunch of UFO heads.
Era website. Yeah, like it's,
seriously.
Right.
Let me see if I can.
He has like a whole article called like "What the Chupacabra Means to Me," which is like, you know, he talks about how it's like been a constant friend, like in the lonely halls of Princeton, like because, yeah.
So I'm just gonna bring the Chupa timeline up here real quick, so that everyone can see it. There we go. So yeah, we'll just quickly go through this just to put this in context. So mid 1970s, I guess this is interestingly like this sort of prequel. Rio Grande Valley, South Texas, sightings of what may have been a condor linked to a rash of mutilated cattle. Blood was removed to the last drop. Early 70s, Brownsville, Texas, rancher finds a bull dead. No blood around it, no tracks. So, yeah, that's like the OG era of cattle mutilations we talked about before, like kind of the Whitley Strieber kind of thing. But then we jump to 1994, Puerto Rico. 4 or 6, quote, little grays found under a bed and chased out of the house with a broom, reported by Joyce Murphy. March 11th, 1995. Now, keep in mind, Species comes out in the U.S. I think on the July 4th weekend of 1995. So this is before Species comes out anywhere. In Orocovis, 8 sheep found dead. The animals had 3 strange marks or puncture holes in the chest and were described as completely drained of blood. August 1995, Canvanas, Puerto Rico. Chupacabra blamed for the death of about 150 animals. Sunday, November 19th, Puerto Rico. The Chupas is blamed in the deaths of dozens of turkeys, rabbits, goats, cats, dogs, and even horses and cows. Said to have ripped open the bedroom window of a house in the north central city of Caguas, destroyed a stuffed teddy bear, and left a puddle of slime and a piece of rancid white meat on the windowsill. It had hairy arms and huge red eyes. In another attack, it came at about 7 a.m. Quote, it just showed up and poof, it vanished. November 19th, 35 times in 3 months. Canavanas, Puerto Rico. Residents saw it one afternoon in his backyard when it came out of the brush and bit the family dog. I think it belongs to the monkey family, but it isn't a monkey exactly, he said. It ran like a monkey and was about 4 feet tall, but it didn't have a tail. December 7th, near Guanica. Unusual bloodless deaths of chickens and cows. December 14th, Naguabo on the East Coast. Several caged rabbits were found dead with holes in the neck area without a drop of blood. Other rabbits had disappeared. Near rabbit cage was a track with a 3-toed claw. Friday, December 15th. In 1 year is thought responsible for at least 1,000 killings, goats, sheep, cattle, chickens, and other animals. There are many eyewitness accounts. The creature is 4 to 6 feet tall, walks upright, is not humanoid, has large oval alien-type eyes. December 18th. Animals died as the result of a single puncture mark found on some part of the body, which apparently drained them of blood. One photo shows a Siamese cat with a puncture mark through its skull. Local tabloid Vocero echoed the possibility that giant vampire bats had infiltrated the island in cargo shipments proceeding from South America. Normal-sized bats are fairly common in the Caribbean. Let's see. Thursday, December 21st, 3 a.m. 44-year-old Osvaldo Claudio Rosado was washing a car. He was grabbed from behind. He tried to fight off the intruder and saw a black-haired, quote, gorilla about 5 feet tall, which ran off. Rosado had cuts in his abdomen, possibly torn by fingernails or claws. Thursday, December 21st, Klamath Falls. Pregnant heifer dead with her right ear gone, hide cut from her face, the tongue cut lengthwise along the top of the teeth, all 4 teats removed, leaving black circles on the surface of the udder, and the rectum and vagina cut out in a neat keyhole cut. No blood at any of the excisions or on the ground. Tuesday, December 26th, Puerto Rico. Woman heard strange noises in her house and dog barking. Siamese cat found dead with genitals removed. 2 guinea hens with their throats slit. A chicken with perforations. And 4 ducks and 4 rabbits dead in their cages. 11 goats found dead. 8 calves frozen and dead. 2 were skinned of their hide from head to hooves. 6 were skinned of all their hide from neck to hooves. All were black and white Holsteins and about a week old. Then in Klamath Falls, Oregon, again, 1 week old calf dead and mutilated. Right ear had been cut off, an entire skull had been removed. Then Northwest Miami rural area in 1996 killed about 40 animals. One saw a dog-like figure standing up with 2 short hands in the air. May 1996, Rio Grande Valley, South Texas. Pet goat dead with 3 puncture wounds in its neck. 6-year-old goat found with, quote, telltale marks of the Chupacabra. Thursday, May 2nd, Juarez, Mexico. Many small mammals, dogs, etc. have met with this tall animal-like being with 3-toed feet and hands on haunches with the forearms suspended at chest level, very similar to a kangaroo. It has a row of spikes or straight feather-like projections from its head and down its back that raise and lower and have been seen to glow with their own light. It has been seen to take off on all fours. The, quote, sucking device seems to be a tube-like projection from the mouth. Attacks are becoming more distributed. Wounds resemble quarter-inch holes similar to a biopsy puncture that extend completely through muscle tissue, and in at least one instance, the wounds were discovered pronouncedly through the inner tissue without leaving any wound traces on the surface layer skin. May 3rd, 1996, Calderon Village, Sinaloa, northern Mexico. A giant bat-like creature terrorizes a village. Goats are found daily with their blood sucked dry, witnesses said today. Farmers have formed night vigilante squads. We are telling people to keep the women and children locked up inside at night, a villager said. Nobody knows really what it is. Dozens of goats have fallen victim to the bloodsucker. It has allegedly attacked 1 human. Wow. Mexican state of Sonora, Veracruz, and Agua Prieta. Numerous animals drained of blood and a vague report of a human suffering the same fate. Dead cows and sheep. The animal is described as 1.5 feet and able to take flight. 6 other states in Mexico where similar attacks have been reported. May 9th, 1996, 2 a.m., Espinoza family. A front door was opened and a creature was seen 3 to 4 feet high with scaly skin, clawed hands, red eyes, and a row of spines from the skull cap and down the back. The creature, quote, mumbled and gestured. Oh. And lastly, here, May 9th, 1996, 5:30 a.m., dawn. A 7-year-old boy in the same house said the creature stood on his bed and briefly on his chest. Both the older and younger Espinoza family members described a smell, quote, like a wet dog. May 10th, Florida. Reports of a chupacabra among Hispanics. Wednesday, May 12th, in Chiapas. 28 dead rams found with puncture marks. And then kind of just a couple creepy things under notes here that are just left without like elaboration. The first one is the world's 3 species of blood-sucking bats live predominantly in the warm climates of Latin America. Similar recent cases have emerged from Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, and El Salvador. Then Puerto Rico harbors a number of military animal research laboratories. Okay, true, interesting. Next one, seeing either the creature or moving lights in the sky has led to speculation that the chupacabras might be from outer space. And finally, here's an old chestnut from a previous episode. The New Jersey Devil adheres to descriptions of physical appearance as well as the nature of the wounds. The puncture wounds are often left resembling the classic vampire bite. Very large, slanted, glowing red eyes, face is flat, perhaps simian-like. Body, some say, is covered with spotted skin like a frog's, or has spikes on its head and back, with chicken legs that have a 3-toed foot about 6 inches long. Such tracks have been found and photographed in dirt near dead animals. This creature has been seen to hop or fly from the ground to a tree or from trees to the ground. It attacks so fast, everything from horses to sheep. It sucks out the blood completely. All right. So... yeah, courtesy of Laurie Williams. I don't know if that's the whole thing or just the end. But that is a little bit of a Chupa's timeline. So, I mean, we're talking about we're talking about a lot of strange blood-sucking attacks that kind of explode in Puerto Rico, for like a year. Yeah. You know, unless you want to say this is like the most radical kind of guerrilla marketing campaign of all time in the Puerto Rican market, to make, to really reach outside the horror audience for Species, I would say that this is something that maybe is a phenomenon that is happening independent of the movie Species. and is not just like caused by people.
Yes.
Clearly, because it starts happening before the movie comes out, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, and it's definitely true that, like, much like with Mothman, like the sort of Mothman phenomenon to like many forms beyond just seeing Mothman. You know, like I always think of the UFO that like shot out like a big long like sucker and like sucked the blood out of like an ambulance or something, right? Like that was seen in Point Pleasant during that time. Like John Keel described something like that, but there was a lot of and like the whole Indrid Cold and all that stuff. Like there was a lot of weird phenomena. Right. Didn't have anything to do with like the figure of Mothman as like this, you know, big creature, right? So, and Chupacabra is kind of similar in that like a lot of like different, like there were a lot of different descriptions of the Chupacabra. You know, there was one that were kind of like Tolentino's, and then there are some that kind of see it as being more dog-like in appearance, you know, and that is often, you know, kind of attributed to the idea that like there would be these mangy or diseased dogs that would then, or, you know, wild dogs or wolves that would then I don't know if they like are wolves, but I think you know, they're like, you know, mangy canids that like are, you can't like hunt wild game, so they have to you know, like go after livestock. And they like get their neck, and that creates puncture wounds, and then people say like, well, was the blood all fully drained, etc. Like there probably are some things attributed to Chupacabra that maybe have something to do with that, but I mean, I do think there's kind of like a bigger mystery here.
Well, I just want to show,
not too different from the broader phenomenon of cattle mutilations. Right?
Well, that's
what cattle exsanguination.
That's what jumps out to me, is that to sort of talk about Chupacabras in a way that's unrelated to that seems kind of odd, because it's like there's such similarities. And let me just put up here, because I noticed that immediately, kind of looking into Chupacabra stuff, I had like an image in my mind that kind of was like a weird, like cosmic, like coyote or hyena or something like that, like much more dog-like, like he said. Mm-hmm. But this is one of the early sketches from somebody who claimed to see. I'm putting it up for the you know, the stream right now. You can see that sketch of the Chupacabra that doesn't really look dog-like. It looks more like a weird alien, you know, kind of. I don't know. Like, I don't even know. Right. It's kind of like a gray, but you know, it's
with
much
kind
more
of spines and sort of fur, sort of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
These kind of weird
That's
wings.
like another famous, like, like. Right. And there's kind of the famous like Chupacabra picture that sometimes people post, which is like a prop from like a haunted house. It kind of looks like a dog, like, or a bat, you know. Yeah, but like it is, someone compared it to the Jersey Devil in terms of how like weird looking it is, and I think like that it does sort of have Jersey Devil type features in that it like, you know, has been described in all these different ways, or having all these different qualities and different sightings, and it kind of gets amalgamated into, you know, right. And this one, it has like really prominent wings.
Yeah. And
so,
it does. So I think there's a lot of shift in terms of like the kind of commonly accepted sort of image of people that claim to have seen it. Like it really varies between like almost a gray to like a kind of like a little like dog creature thing with like chicken legs that's like running around, like a little more terrestrial. It almost like spans the full gamut of the, you know, like, is Bigfoot you know, an uncharted mammal, or is Bigfoot like a cosmic like djinn, like from another dimension? Right. You know, it's like the Chupacabra almost like the way it appears to people, it kind of blatantly runs that gamut from like a weird little dog rat thing to like some kind of weird ET, and accompanied by all this UFO activity.
Well, another like angle is that was like pretty prominent is like the occult angle, and this kind of gets into the sort of like demographic, like sort of nature of the Caribbean in certain ways, but like and in particular of Puerto Rico. But like first, let me like kind of like wrap up, because I think this is like kind of a telling thing. Like, so just, you know, this like just like listen to this rationale, because I find this to be striking. So this is going back to Tolentino and going back to Radford, just to like wrap up what he says. What he says here, says, at first it may seem like Tolentino was saying nothing more significant than that certain aspects of what she had seen in the film reminded her of what was happening in real life in Puerto Rico at that time. For example, it would be like an American audience in 2008 watching the film The Hurt Locker. You know, the movie's clearly fictional, but it's set in a real place, followed by elements of real life. But a closer reading of the interview suggests that instead, Tolentino, his italics, believed that what she saw in the film was actually happening in real life. She then asked a follow-up question about the film, was asked a follow-up question. In other words, does species make you think there might have been an experiment in which a being escaped and is now at large in Puerto Rico? Tolentino responded, yes, but they managed to kill her in the movie. Look, a journalist told me that El Yunque, jungle wildlife refuge in Puerto Rico, said to be the Chupacabra's origin, was allegedly closed down because of the damage caused by Hurricane Hugo. He told me the truth that some experiment had escaped, not monkeys or anything like that. They never found those creatures. The journalist knows a lot about it because he's been researching for a while. And so Radford says, note the interview was conducted in Puerto Rico in 1996, less than a year after Tolentino's sightings. Therefore, when the questioner, Lucy Pla, refers to events in the present tense, she is referring to a time when the Chupacabra reports were flourishing in Puerto Rico. And he writes, I believe it is clear that Tolentino believed the creatures and events she saw in a science fiction thriller movie were actually happening in reality at the time in Puerto Rico. That interpretation completely disregards the fact that like she was contacted by a journalist who like told her that this was true and like that actually had happened, has nothing to do with the movie. And in fact, she distinguishes the events of the movie from reality clearly and says in the movie they killed her, but like
that's crazy.
In real life, something like the movie happened, but it's not, you know. Like,
that is like
insane.
Some real lore gymnastics to like twist around her words. I think she's pretty clear there. She said, well, they killed her in the movie. I think what he's willfully misunderstanding what she's saying, which I think is that like she thinks this movie was based on something that was real. Like it's alluding to something
there
that's
was like
real.
Predictive programming in the movie. Yeah,
where it's like inspired by some real secret shit they really were doing, and in that sense, it's real. But he's like, no, like literally in her experience of reality, she thought this was like a documentary about like a real. Like, come on,
and
wow.
he like puts it in italics, which is like so. Like to me, that is like it's one thing to like not believe in the Chupacabra or like come up with like these, trying to figure out what was really going on and that there was something supernatural out of the ordinary really and it was just mass hysteria or whatever. That's one thing, that's like a debunker mentality. Like fair enough, many people approach things that way, but like this is like almost
he's got to do some racist anthropology,
like a false
too.
Consciousness. Yeah, exactly. But so that's like kind of an example of sort of the standard like line in the Chupacabra, and you see this idea of species, like the connection with species, that is basically the sort of hegemonic way to dismiss like all of this under the like ignoring like the vampire of Mocha, like all these sort of things that preceded the sort of Chupacabra flap of 1995, all the people who like experienced it, all the sort of exsanguinated animals, all this stuff, the parallels of cattle, like it's all kind of like dismissed under the heading of like, oh, it was from species, like, which is, kind of, it's a convenient and maybe appealing story. Yeah, it is.
Thought terminating cliche. You do see this happen sometimes where like it just kind of, it makes you feel good and like wraps everything up in like a funny little thing. And then you can move on and not think about it. That's very like appealing to a lot of people. You can really, especially if you really put it out there and make it like, the most dominant message to take from it is like, actually, there's one weird little ironic thing about this story that makes it a really simple explanation that means we don't have to look into it, and you can feel smart for having figured it out. Like, I think some people like yearn for that shit of like the one secret little thing that explains that it wasn't a conspiracy, that it wasn't something that was concealed. Like, actually, people are, as we'll get to in later parts of today's stuff. I think there's like several examples of that. Of people wanting
to. It does go
to
like the Slee Stack a little bit. The guy who said that, from Land of the Lost, looks a little bit like that too. Exactly. But that's the thing. Like a Slee Stack is based on like kind of a lizard and a person, right? And the Sill from Species is based kind of on like a person, like some like people's imaginations are kind of limited by like their experience and perception of reality. Like that's a kind of a big thing, right? That you can't really imagine something that like you sort of don't have any frame of reference for, like is not based on something that you've seen, right? Like most aliens designs and movies are going to be based on things that exist, right? And so I think it's like not so like I think it's kind of like almost like a fallacious approach to be like, oh well, this person described seeing something by comparison to like familiar things. And there's something in the movie that also looks like what she described, kind of, which is like, those are basically the same process. And obviously there's going to be some overlap, like with something, it's some movie like that like, you could find, right? Like it's like whenever someone's like, oh, it looked kind of like this, you're describing something that no one else has seen, right? And you're saying like, well, it had this like this, it had this like that. that's basically exactly how H.R. Geiger went about creating Syl, or how anyone creates any kind of movie alien or movie monster.
Right.
So like someone is going to have come up with something that you can at least sort of relate to what she described.
Right. And just because somebody's referring to a very popular like representation, like a fictional representation of a thing to like help you wrap your head around, like to describe it. Like I'm thinking if somebody had a Bigfoot sighting and they said, well, you know, the figure kind of looked like a Chewbacca from Star Wars, to then turn around and be like, this person, they saw Star Wars and they think they saw Chewbacca. Like, obviously, they're just thinking this because they saw Star Wars. And it's like, that's not necessarily the case. Like, that, you know what I mean? Because they're just trying to, like, it looked like a big, furry, tall man, like, walking around, you know, like, they would just, I don't know, like, that doesn't actually debunk it, but people like to take that opportunity to be like, oh, well, you saw this in a movie, and you're just, like, dumbly projecting that onto reality. Yeah, it's pretty sus. That's a pretty sus way of. In
terms of like good things that I found about the Chupacabra, like I found like two like scholars who've kind of written about it in an interesting way. One is like Robin / Lauren Derby, who goes by both first names. I think her name is like Lauren Robin Derby or Robin Lauren Derby, but you know, sometimes she's her byline is Lauren Derby, sometimes it's Robin, and the other one is Ronaldo Roman. Like in the book you mentioned, Governing Spirits. I want to read from Lauren Derby's Imperial Secrets, Vampires and Nationhood in Puerto Rico. She does something that like I don't like love like when I see it, which is kind of like, you know, all of these like kind of belief in the supernatural, or like belief in like the unseen, or belief in kind of like spiritual agencies or things like this, or the occult. It's all actually kind of like an expression of people like hating capitalism, which like, you know, I feel like it's kind of like sort of this like hermeneutic of suspicion, where it's like, well, what they're really expressing are like how correct my beliefs are, which I, you know, find to be like a bit problematic. But I do I think that her essay is good and pretty interesting. And she has her epigrams are great, which are rumor is the process by which a collective historical consciousness is built. Jan Vancina. Secrecy lies at the very core of power. Elias Canetti. And she writes, in 1994, residents of a small town in Canovanas, Puerto Rico, reported that dozens of farm animals have been discovered dead, their blood apparently sucked dry via tiny perforations in the neck and abdomen. The creature attacks small animals such as ducks, rabbits, pigs, chickens, and goats. Its preference for goats soon earning it the appellation Chupacabras, or goat sucker in Spanish. Over the coming months, the depredations continued, spreading into the southern United States and Mexico, with over 300 animals reported dead in northern Mexico alone in the coming months, and some 2,000 in total by April 1996. Eyewitnesses came forth with descriptions of a grotesque creature about 3 feet tall, with membraned wings, a hunchback, large eyes, covered with either scales or quills. It was said to resemble a kangaroo, since it leapt from large back legs, and had tiny front arms with a strikingly pungent smell. Over time, the panic caused by the slaughter caused inhabitants to board up their residences, hire guards to protect their animals, and supervise children on their way to school. Sheep and cattle ranchers as far afield as northern Mexico sold off their herds, since they had already been hard hit by an extended drought that had catastrophic consequences. The governments of Mexico and Puerto Rico eventually intervened in the crisis, as authorities sought to assuage fears through holding informational press conferences with prominent biologists who theorized that drought might have forced bats to look for new nutritional sources, or that the deaths might have been caused by a pack of wild dogs. The president of the Puerto Rico House of Representatives Agricultural Commission called for an official investigation, and even in Miami, a zoo pathologist held a public necropsy to demonstrate their case that the supposed chupacabras was a puma or dog. The Chupacabras quickly spread out of its local context as it was picked up by the news media and popularized by the Latino television network Univision, NBC, New York Times. Sorry, I'm just checking the stream because I was frozen, but as long as you can hear me, it's fine. The New York Times and Latina talk show hostess Christina, who did a show on the events, websites forming the web, and eventually it was memorialized in an X-Files episode and even a Scooby-Doo cartoon. The trickster symbol held special appeal to countercultural urban Latino youth who sported its image on T-shirts, embracing it as a figure of urban savagery akin to the tattoo and nose pierce. It was merchandised in the form of baseball caps, keychains, and Halloween costumes. I remember going to Puerto Rico like around like the early 2000s with my family when I was like a little kid, and like I remember seeing like Chupacabra like merchandise and like signs and stuff all around.
Chupa merch everywhere.
Yeah. But what is striking is how the chupacabras became a popular cultural phenomenon as individuals designed and produced T-shirts of the beasts and then consumed them in droves. At the 1994 Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City, there were so many chupacabras T-shirts that this became the focus of journalistic coverage of the event. The chupacabras became a Creole totem and anti-hero, a source of laughter and gothic humor for many, since at least one image invited the public to ridicule the true believers. Notwithstanding its mass cultural spread, this essay seeks to disentangle the discursive threads interwoven in these accounts to uncover some of the meanings that chupacabras had, especially for the original Puerto Rican eyewitnesses, those who initially generated the reports that spread to Mexico, Chile, and elsewhere. The chupacabras craze, I will argue, had its own significance to the inhabitants of Canovanas, who were at first flattered by the international attention they received, a mood which shifted to sour betrayal upon discovering just how quickly their narratives could escape their ownership and control. They felt manipulated by an international media that at first competed to collect their stories, which were then used to mock them as ignorant hicks. The rumors commenced in Canovanas, quickly spreading to the internet, where they were endowed with a new set of meanings that were later re-embedded in Canovanas. The chupacabra's tale belie the presumption that superstitions are necessarily pre-modern atavisms. I will propose by contrast that the chupacabra's belief was an urban legend, a popular commentary on modernity and its risks as they are perceived in Puerto Rico. Along the way, I want to explore the larger methodological problem of how to interpret popular beliefs or superstitions that are both widely held as well as widely held to be false, thus ideoscapes in which revelation and concealment, trick and technique, faith and skepticism work in tandem. Scholars examining, just checking the footnotes here. Yeah, it's from A Magic and Modernity, Interfaces of Revelation and Concealment, Bridget Meyer and Peter Pels. Kind of sounds interesting. So she writes, scholars examining the link between witchcraft and politics have considered how witchcraft and sorcery accusations reflect political structures. Peter Geischer, for example, has examined how witchcraft, which commenced as the dark side of kinship, became a language for expressing moral disdain for the new forms of accumulation of state elites in post-colonial Cameroon. Others have considered the way notions of sorcery or concealed power have been invoked to explain contemporary backstage state practices, especially in the Latin American arena, where the theater of politics extends into personal encounters and informal deal-making. That's another one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, unlike in North America, where the theater of politics does not extend into personal encounters or informal deal making,
or putting on the acolyte robes at Bohemian Grove to chant with Walter Cronkite in front of the owl,
exactly,
exactly.
It's kind of like it's sort of like this. I keep thinking back to our first episode of the year, I think, where we talked about the sort of the idea of Latin America being problematic as a framework in some ways, useful in others, but sometimes it serves to kind of separate those Latin Americans who do things so differently from the United States, which has a lot of the same features and a lot of the same history and a lot of cultural overlap, especially when you're making these generalizations about informal deal making as being a feature of politics. But
it's always the corruption kind of cloud that apparently it just exists down there, but up here we have the rule of law, we have the Anglo-Saxon rule of law, and that those sort of things don't happen. Maybe sometimes they happen a little more openly in some of these places, but even a lot of those are literally propped up by the U.S. So and who are they making deals with? Probably Americans. You know what I mean? There's always attempts to build this kind of conceptual wall between the two.
But she does make some good points. She says, neoliberal economic policies of the 1980s and 1990s undercut traditional safety nets for the poor, resulting in a new level of suspicion among the citizenry, many of whom were correct in accusing statesmen of earning large kickbacks as unemployment and basic commodity prices rose, creating the basis for potent new allegations of illicit wealth accumulation among statesmen and their international allies, such as the IMF. Fears about globalization translated into veritable sorcery accusations in many contexts as gringos were attacked under the presumption that they were stealing babies and cash undercover. In contexts such as, this is a bit of an old article now, so she hasn't read the latest Epstein drop, but in contexts such as Guatemala, anxieties about the globalization of markets in a context of transnational unequal exchange were thus displaced onto a more tangible enemy, Puerto Rico. However, was projected from this particular phase of millennial capitalism and the fears of sovereignty erosion that resulted from it due to its Commonwealth status as a U.S. overseas territory, which artificially buoys the economy through corporate tax exemption and welfare subsidies for the poor. Yet the fact that the Chupacabras was read as a sign of surreptitious power reflects Puerto Rico's own uniquely bifurcated political structure. I wish to argue that the Chupacabra's rumors in Puerto Rico were a reflection of how the imperial U.S. state is seen in the political imagination of Puerto Ricans, one that expresses a set of contradictions that are very specific to being an, quote, unincorporated territory, that is, belonging to but not being a part of the United States. Governmental bureaucracy is split, since much of the daily operation of federal government agencies operates according to policy directives emanating in Washington. The very concealment of federal authorities and their motivations produces a particular kind of state effect as people wonder and talk about what transpires behind the mask of power at the point of origin where it does articulate with civil society. The state in Puerto Rico is thus pervasive yet remote, commanding yet invisible, since much of the actual muscle of U.S. imperial power resides on the island because the U.S. armed forces have enormous holdings on Puerto Rican soil. It is the command center for the South Atlantic Fleet, the testing and training grounds for interventions such as Iraq. Puerto Ricans, thus, are actually intimately linked to U.S. military power, but they remain outsiders looking in, condemned to the services of the wall of secrecy, one which, as George Simmel reminded us, often amplifies the perceived value within, as well as creates a lust for confession, as we shall see. Yeah, and so I'll try to go get out of the issue of. She also brings out brings up species and things like that, but so the extent of media involvement in shaping popular understandings of these rumors and diffusing particular versions certainly makes it impossible to render a highly localized sociological reading in the style of early modern witchcraft scholars for whom the vectors of accusation sketch fissures in a social order. One problem, of course, is that the Chupacabra sightings involved a manifest outsider. If early modern European witchcraft was an idiom of intimacy, revealing kinship tensions within families, as Louise White has said, for East African vampires, the Chupacabras were outside the social context. They were seen to be internationalized, professionalized, supervised, and commodifying. As one observer said, it was something monstrous, strange, out of the natural. I don't believe it could have been a human, canine, or primate. Yet as quintessential other, what then do the Chupacabras represent? Much of the journalistic coverage sought to locate the Chupacabras with the nutritional folklore of shapeshifter trickster figures in the Caribbean. Along these lines, the Chupacabras could be seen as a modern incarnation of a range of night creatures with the ability to transmogrify from one species to another. The galipote in the Dominican Republic is one such nocturnal creature which can fly and suck blood, and the Gara Diablo is a frightening creature that guards lagoons and swamps. In the Puerto Rican province of Loiza, contiguous to where the Chupacabras was first sighted, femininity is said to have its malevolent side. Women are said to be able to change into witches, just as in Haiti, lesbians are said to cause earthquakes. Nor was this the first vampiric creature to hit Puerto Rican shores. This is, the vampire of Mocha. In 1975, Puerto Rico was assaulted by the Vampiro de Mocha, which had purportedly sucked animals to death. The Spanish province of Galicia, which sent disproportionate numbers of immigrants to the Hispanic Caribbean in the 19th century, has a deep tradition of vampire lore that may have meshed with lingering sorcery practices of the Taino and Carib indigenes, which feature corpse resurrection among other necromantic rites. But this assumes the Chupacabra should be classed as part of the animal species. Like the Andean Pishtaco, however, there is something mechanical about the Chupacabras. Pishtaco, aka Kari Siri, rumors tell tales of plump white men wearing chaps and cowboy boots and hats who suck the fat from Indian bodies and send it to industrial plants to fuel machinery.
Oh my God.
Folks, they're out there.
Yeah.
Thus, if the Kharasiri is human, it works closely with technology, and the depth of its vileness deprives it of all humanity. The Chupacabras appears automated, almost machine-like. It was said to fly as fast as a bullet. For example, Madeline Tolentino was struck by the large blank eyes of the Chupacabras that resembled Christmas lights, its apparent absence of genitalia, as well as its slow and regular movements, which made her think it was actually a robot that was manipulated by something else. And, someone in the chat mentioned that, yes, that was also a feature of the Hopkinsville Goblins.
They were robotic in some way. Yeah.
They seemed like the bullets kind of clanged off them, I think, too.
They had a metallic nature.
Yeah. It is often claimed that it lacks certain defining features of animal life, such as ears, nose, or genitals. She described its putrid smell as akin to battery acid, or the medicinal chloroseptic. As Tolentino put it, it was not animal or human. It was not of this world.
Chimera.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a chimera.
Right. Nor does the Chupacabra appear in sites that exemplify nature, the kind of bucolic traditional springs and hills where miraculous virgins and Christian figures make their appearance. The Chupacabra appears in a car mechanic's workshop, or on the highway near Kmart, or near the Arecibo telescope. Of course, this is quite appropriate to Puerto Rico since, as Sidney Mintz has noted, the Caribbean is an intrinsically modern region due to its absence of any autochthonous population, and as a region of immigrants defined by the proto-industrial rhythms of sugar monoculture and slavery. In the late 19th century, Puerto Rico was transformed from a mixed agro-export economy with a Creole hacendado, or landholding class, into a sugar monocultural economy dominated by U.S.-owned agro-export plantations concentrated in the hands of a few large corporations. While the sugar economy was based in the coastal regions and thus did not penetrate the interior, rural inhabitants were forcibly drawn into the wage labor force through the libreta, or passbook system, in the 1870s. Unlike neighboring Cuba and the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico had become a nation of dispossessed peasants by the time the U.S. arrived in 1898, a condition which grew even more acute after U.S. annexation with the expansion of large corporate sugar plantations. As Gordon Lewis puts it, the average Puerto Rican is today a proletarian, whether urban or rural. That said, the municipality of Loiza, within which the birthplace of the Chupacabras, Canovanas, was located until 1971, was one of the last refuges for the survival of a jibaro, or mountain peasant lifestyle, one which defiantly held on to its independence even in the face of proletarianization. Loiza divided into two distinct zones: a lowland sugar plantation area surrounded by mangrove wetlands, and the Sierra de Luquilo, where El Yunque rainforest is located. An itinerant subculture developed in which jibaros combined seasonal wage labor in the lowland with sales of gathered products in San Juan. The existence of extensive coastal and highland forests enabled an autonomous proto-peasantry to exist for centuries, even as the Canovanas plantation expanded. The Luquilo Mountains had long served as an internal frontier, providing a sanctuary to Taino rebels, runaway slaves, and other fugitives, a region lacking settled hamlets even when much of it was transformed into a protected U.S. government forest in 1903. Jail escapee Tonio Bicicleta became a folk hero. Bicicleta became a folk hero there as late as the 1970s. The deep identity divide in this whiter backlands mountain subculture, which perceived itself as very distinct from the largely black coastal sugar plantation below, was one of the reasons Canovanas broke away and formed its own municipality in 1971. So, she goes on to talk about Canovanas. I'm mindful of the time, so I can't read this whole article, but I will, read from here, Smoke and Mirrors. The original theater of the Chupacabras rumors thus represented a particular political subculture or occult cosmology in Puerto Rico, a small, relatively homogeneous island, but one that is shaped by a deep political divide. Most residents of Canovanas are members of the Statehood Party, NPP, thus advocates of a total merger with the United States in the form of a 51st state. Thus, the question emerges why a group that arguably sees itself as most closely identified with the U.S. on the island would conjure up a beast that they see as a product of the predatory designs of the United States on Puerto Rico, as we shall see. The Chupacabras narratives thus reveal a complex and deeply ambivalent cognitive map, to use Frederick Jameson's terms, one which is both deeply suspicious of power, but at the same time longs to be able to identify with it. Certainly, Canovanas outsiders saw the Chupacabras rumors as superstition in the sense of being religiously and morally illegitimate, and as a result, many witnesses kept quiet for fear of ridicule. Yet Edward Evans Pritchard abandoned terms like superstition precisely for its derogatory connotations. As he would have it, the Chupacabras rumors sought to explain the otherwise inexplicable scores of real animal deaths, and they had their own rationality. Discerning their deeper logic, however, forces one to move beyond the shape of apparition itself. The assailant's description varied wildly from account to account, as did the explanations of reported true origin. It was said to be scaly or furry, or plumed, a beast, a humanoid, a robot, or a space alien, a dinosaur relic, or a futuristic clone from outer space.
Interesting.
Checking on the stream. Is the stream?
Oh, okay. Being a little choppy,
making sure. Because I saw it kind of. It doesn't matter at the video, I guess. Or the very incarnation of the devil with its telltale sulfuric stench. If there were debates about exactly what the Chupacabra looked like, however, the far more interesting discussion was over where it came from. And if analyzing the beast's appearance might locate it within the realm of mythic beings, its accompanying narratives of origin reveal it to be a subset of conspiratorial political lore. Then it goes on to talk about the chimeras, how it might be a military intelligence experiment that was kind of, the sort of idea, extraterrestrials in Puerto Rico have become quite seamlessly absorbed into older Catholic sacred topographies. Manimals have been frequently spotted in sites where miraculous virgins have appeared, such as the site of the Blessed Virgin at Monte Santo near Lomas Verdes, which is also a place where other kinds of paranormal activities, such as UFOs, have been reported. I mean, all right, anyway, I'm just going to keep going. In the 1970s, during a wave of UFO sightings, apparitions of Weeping Virgin statues and Christ appearances in churches coincided with manimals and reports of men in black. At times, extraterrestrial apparitions merge the alien and the sacred in uncanny ways, such as the figures seen in Laguna Cartagena, who were described as tall, delicate men with long hair who could be Star Wars characters with their silver spacesuits, or modern-day Jesus Christs. UFOs are here seen as wondrous signs of the supernatural, indicative that, as Carl Jung argued, the theme of humanity's rescue by extraterrestrial beings is a religious myth recast in technological guise. I mean, we've talked about this endlessly, like that these aren't, we're not extraterrestrial hypothesis people on Islamul Jihad. We advocate Jinn theory, and
I guess
so
ultra-terrestrial, if you will.
If there is any kind of ultra-terrestrial of anything. But I mean, in a way, Jinn are kind of like terrestrial. Maybe you call them paraterrestrial.
Right. And also inseparable, inseparable from like a pattern of deception also, which is like critical, of like whatever this phenomenon is, it likes to kind of shapeshift and be ambiguous and be weird and not, exactly be straightforward. Whatever
this is like kind of a relevant part. Whatever it may be. So I feel like the sort of distinction, obviously the discourse of it is distinct and like worth talking about, but talking about the underlying phenomena, I guess that's kind of in a way what she is saying. But so she says, if Puerto Ricans distrust the federal government's true motivations and objectives, there is a long history that gave rise to this presumption of guilt. In Vieques, for example, there is ample testimony that live bombing included dirty bombs containing depleted uranium and chemical munitions which have left toxic residues such as lead, cadmium, cobalt, and radiation that have given rise to high rates of skin disease, cancer, and other abnormalities. And within the domain of healthcare, during the infamous Rhodes Affair, the Rockefeller Foundation was said to have injected cancer cells into Puerto Ricans as part of a genocidal plot to eliminate the Puerto Rican population. While, as Laura Briggs relates, this particular allegation was found to be untrue. I don't know, we'll see. The creation of a permanent federally funded birth control program was seen by some as part of a broader effort to reduce the unwanted poor and brown Puerto Rican population, as were the later introductions of birth control products and techniques such as spermaticides, Depo-Provera, the IUD, the pill and sterilization measures. As Briggs states, the relentlessly fertile Puerto Rican woman provided the ideal testing ground for experimentation, just as the island became the jewel in the crown of U.S. development policy. Indeed, one could argue that given this history of misunderstanding and at times outright connivance, there is good reason for Puerto Ricans alongside African Americans and Native Americans to believe the worst about U.S. government intentions.
Yeah, fair enough.
The hunger, definitely. The hunger for knowledge about U.S. covert activities has led to a vibrant market for texts that reveal secrets. Such unlikely material as the memoirs and personal correspondences of Navy Admiral William Leahy, governor of Puerto Rico from 1939 to 1940, have become recreational reading. While short, his regime was of great importance because he presided over the dramatic expansion of U.S. military presence as Puerto Rico became the sentry station for the Caribbean and the Panama Canal. That's going to come up later. Another example of a surprise bestseller is the book detailing secret negotiations between the highly popular governor, Luis Munoz Marin, and Robert McNamara over the proposed removal of every last inhabitant of Vieques and Culebra, and even their cemeteries, a poignantly morbid detail that seems to bespeak a U.S. desire to erase not only the human presence, but all remaining traces of its history, even if their intention was the opposite. The aptly named Plan Dracula resembled a classic Devil's Pack narrative, an exchange of untold treasure for human life, since the deal would have swapped 8,570 people and their ancestors' remains for millions of dollars from the Department of Defense.
Jesus,
a fictional
what the
work.
Fuck?
That's insane. A fictional work that might, Plan Dracula. A fictional work that might be also somewhat uneasily accommodated into this genre of rites of exposure that made a tremendous splash was a historical novella, Seva, by Luis Lopez Nieves, which was a runaway success with more than 7 printings. This book recounts the story of a previously undisclosed U.S. intervention months before the real arrival of U.S. troops in July 1898, when Puerto Rico was taken by force into the U.S. imperial orbit. In this account, an earlier intervention occurred, which was defeated by valiant Puerto Rican resistance. But U.S. General Miles returns to have the entire town razed so that all traces of the event would be erased. The memory of the event, however, was protected by the sole survivor, whom the narrator eventually tracks down. In the text, Miles built Roosevelt Roads naval base in the very ashes of the heroic town of Seva. Here we see the secrets concealed by the military materialize as a hidden history of heroic resistance that the U.S. violently uprooted, erased, lied about, and eventually bulldozed over. The U.S. government is accused of hiding a secret of such profound importance that it would completely change the way Puerto Ricans imagine themselves, their history, and U.S.-Puerto Rican relations. This tale of U.S. betrayal rang so true to Puerto Ricans' patterns of mistrust that, while fictional, it was taken as historical fact. A disproportionate number of Chupacabra's narratives have been generated by inside outsiders who have some access to the secrets of power, or who police its margins. Those who are close enough to touch the walls and halls of power, the skin of the secrets, yet are still denied real access. Indeed, retired police officers, members of the Civil Defense Force, the ROTC, the Meteorological Service, the Forestry Service, Army veterans, and police detectives are key traffickers in the currency of information about the Chupacabras and UFOs, here read as clues revealing hidden truths about U.S. military activities, thus secrets of state. If secrecy forms a veil that enhances the power of the concealed object, these individuals, as Johnson puts it, help mill and polish the reputation of secretism, that is, the gossip exchange about the reputations of the secrets. They also magnify the perception of the power of the concealed by what Michael Taussig calls the skilled revelation of skilled concealment, revelation of the method, reminding us that exposure of the trick is no less necessary to the magic of magic than its concealment. These gatekeepers, located in between, I had to track down that Taussig viscerality, faith, and skepticism, because that seems like a better framework for revelation of the method than, what does it come from? Does it come from some feral house dude,
Fritz Springmeier or something? I forget who might have rolled that out.
Or
like Behold the
or something. I don't know.
Cooper.
Oh yeah, might be that. But I remember like it being kind of like it's a common turn of phrase, but it's sort of like not well theorized and like not very coherent. But that seems like
it's supposed to be Masonic, right?
Like what people often sort of mean when they say that, or at least what we kind of use this as sort of a term of art to mean, is sort of what Taussig is expressing there. It might be. It's supposed to be some kind of like a rule where like, does the Satanists have to tell you?
Alex
what
Jones
they do
would
as
say
part of their
kind
rules
of,
or something.
He would more or less like the globalists that they gotta get your buy-in. Like they gotta get you to accept that you want to be depraved, you want to be sick, you want to be a globalist slave. And then somehow cosmically, like that will basically make them like not, I don't know, karmically liable somehow, or at least they think that it doesn't make them karmically. That's how their magic works. Like it's all a little bit vague. I think it was supposed to be. I feel like there was actually some kind of like Freemasonic or rumored Freemasonic like ritual that was called the Revelation of the Method, but I don't know if that's meant for like the general public or if it's like for initiates. Like the method is being revealed to you through this ceremony, like where it's kind of explaining to you what it's all about. Now, then like Vigilant Citizen kind of took it and ran with it about like pop videos, and being like every time Ariana Grande is like in a checkerboard ballroom and like putting one eye up and like, taking her face off.
Well, now it's
like
kind
this
of
is
used
revelation
for like,
of the BSK method.
Yeah, the clues that they have to put in, they have to like do this because like they have to like having the dollar bill, like that it folds and it reveals 9/11 or something, because if they didn't do that, then like the Satanism like wouldn't work or whatever, which like it is a principle of like magic or like of theatricality in general, like in a play or something like that, right? Which is like kind of how like there is like a a legitimate analogy to be made between like drama and social life, as there always has been, and like this is sometimes how people think about planning or organizing things, especially events or like especially like sort of spectacles and things like that, right? Like you do want to, like when something is sort of a dramatic reveal at the end, right? You want to feel in some way that this has been a payoff for like clues that existed before, right? That is like a principle that people kind of observe, kind of bring this into
Chekhov's
the sort
gun
of
being one example.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, right. Like it's kind of like not as satisfying if the character just takes out a gun that like and then like blasts someone. It's like, what? You had a gun the whole time? You kind of
right.
People love Chekhov's gun, right?
Yeah.
So there is like there's something to the idea, like the skilled revelation of skilled concealment, right? But also Chekhov's gun can be done poorly, where you kind of it's like a very interesting needle to thread, where like sometimes like it can be heavy-handed, where it's like, oh, that's gonna come back, and that's like not satisfying either. So you want to have it be like that moment of anagoresis, right? Where you have this like, oh, and
right.
like that,
it's been stuck in
like
your
magic tricks,
subconscious,
all sorts of things. Yeah,
and like the thing coming,
right,
it makes you feel like the whole story, what you've been watching, has a significance, because like if you went back and watched it, you would like see things differently now than the way you experienced it the first time, maybe you kind of suspected something, but then it creates a very powerful effect.
Yeah. And those kind of rules of like, skilled revelation of skilled concealment, I think, it's perfectly put, like that, that does kind of apply to like sort of the way that power like maintains its mystique, and how like it, in many ways perpetuates its power. But so to just to conclude here, I'll read her kind of a last part. So we must now return to the question of why the particular community of Canovanas would be responsible for the invention of the gargoyle face of the Chupacabras and its attendant narratives of U.S. covert operations and men in black run amok. One possible scenario is that the Chupacabras initially emerged as a figure of Satan, a frightening changeling or shapeshifter that provided a moralistic explanation for the run of small farm animal deaths that had plagued this interior mountainous region. These deaths may have been read as apocalyptic signs due to turn-of-the-millennium anxieties. Indeed, one of the first informants was Alicia Rivera, a Pentecostal priest, and mayor of Camo Soto, Margaret Tolentino, and her husband, of course, all form part of the tightly knit Pentecostal community of Canovanas. Evangelical churches, with their strong interpersonal networks and media command, have been found responsible for other rumors of remarkable spreads, such as stories of satanic ritual abuse that emerged around U.S. daycare centers in the late 1980s. Allegations of satanic cults were sacrificing children and eating their victims alive landed many daycare providers and associated parents in jail. Some who actually did it, but these accounts may then have been taken up by Puerto Rican ufologists, who proceeded to embellish a narrative, revealing the beast to be a totemic emblem of sinister governmental forces, including the CIA, FBI, and DoD, and extraterrestrial agents of a higher order. These narratives made sense due to the culture of suspicion shared by many Puerto Ricans vis-a-vis U.S. government motives, the widespread belief in UFOs, and a certain anxiety about where Puerto Rico really stands in relation to the U.S. If, as Black says, the Caribbean is a U.S. quote-unquote backyard, a place where we let our hair down and dump our garbage, Puerto Ricans indeed may have some troubling uncertainties as to whether they are located on the front stage of the backyard or the backstage of the front yard. Millenarian anxieties ran rife in the years leading up to 2000 as rumors spread like wildfire that computers and technology would crash. If these rumors indexed apocalyptic concerns about the impact of humankind on nature, in Puerto Rico, these issues are intimately bound with the problem of sovereignty, since the U.S., after all, is the machine in their garden. Long in agrarian society, 70% of the food consumed in the island is imported from the mainland U.S. While people enjoy their fast food, they also worry about transgenicos, or genetic hybrid foodstuffs, and whether they are being sneaked into the shelves of their local bodegas or corner markets. I like how he puts bodegas in italics, and it's like, it's like bodegas. Well, Vieques, with its powder white beaches, looks like an island paradise. It is actually riddled with thousands of tons of undetonated concrete explosives, rockets, and mines. And much of the waterfront has been declared a danger zone by the U.S. Navy. And for an island which casts its post-colonial history as pastoralism lost, the ultimate contradiction may be that the live impact area of Vieques has now been renamed a, quote, wilderness area, with public access prohibited due to hazardous contaminants. This reversal with the very relationship between nature and culture indexes the world very much out of balance. Michael Rogan has elucidated the curious way that during the Cold War, secrecy actually came to function as a form of spectacle in the U.S. political theater. In the name of national security, nuclear warfare became a key component of American foreign policy making, the actual contours of which may not be divulged, but which nonetheless became a public secret that served to represent U.S. strength overseas. This may explain the strange fact that in eyewitness sighting, observers who encountered the beast, who should be relaying how they saw the chupacabras, end up recounting the uncanny experience of actually being watched by the creature. As Miguel Molina told me, my wife saw through the window and it watched her. It observed her. These testimonies bespeak an experience of exclusion, fear, and wonder, which was foregrounded during the 1995 Chupacabra's panic, but one which is part of the background noise of everyday life for many Puerto Ricans, who feel highly vulnerable in the face of an all-powerful federal government. This essay has explored a popular fantasy of secrecy at the heart of U.S. imperial statecraft, one in which the federal government is presumed to be a cipher for diabolical intentions, and the state appears as a surreptitious and malevolent force. Born of a particular contradiction that is deeply Puerto Rican, one of extensive U.S. presence, which is concurrently shrouded in wonder due to its very inscrutability, the Chupacabras then provide us with a glimpse of the phenomenology of U.S. imperial power at the fin de siècle by the poor and marginal who live in its shadows.
Wow.
Perhaps this is why the post-Canovanas trail of chupacabras in Latin America followed that of U.S. 20th century war and covert operations. From Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Chile, it may even invite comparisons to the far-flung Solomon Islands, where Michael Scott reports that a cargo cult with an imaginary air fleet under the water lies awaiting the return of the U.S. Navy, where a U.S. base was established during World War II. Again, this cargo cult thing, not like the biggest fan of it, but yeah.
Actually, hold on just one second. I'm going to step over. You can finish reading. I'll be right back.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll stop. I'll just finish the paragraph. This also helps explain why the Chupacabras was ultimately embraced with some humor, since it bespoke a profound ambivalence about things American that resonates deeply with many Puerto Ricans. Canovenses were mocked by the media, but in many ways, their homegrown Chupacabras monster reveals not their quote-unquote paranoid delusions so much as their resounding belief in a populist discourse of conspiracy, one that dreams of transparency even in the face of abundant evidence of the dark and sordid designs of the U.S. on Puerto Rico and elsewhere. And given the history of the U.S. and Puerto Rico, it bespeaks a paranoia which, as George Marcus sensibly reminds us, may be, quote, a reasonable component of rational and commonsensical thought in certain contexts. Thus, the Chupacabras begins to look less like an element of folkloric residue and more a post-Cold War glimpse of the face of American imperialism as it looks from the backstage of empire, in the eyes of those who want nothing more than to be on the other side of the curtain. After all, Freud would argue that these narratives must represent longing and desire as much as they do fear and loathing. Again, so you can kind of see, like, the elements of it that, like, I personally don't like so much, where it's kind of like, like even the sort of like psychoanalyzing, which I feel like doesn't really, I definitely appreciate it, like, relative to the sort of like skeptoid, Bradford take. But in terms of like the kind of, and I think that it like does kind of like talk about how these are actually, in fact, like rational responses, right? And I think Roman, which I also want to get to, like takes that even further. And I think like his is kind of the one I like the most. But I mean, I'll wait for Dimitri to return to discuss this more, I guess. Let's see. I can't. He's not back yet. But let me go through the chat here. See if there's any comment worth noting. Mermaid Atlas book for my daughter. There's so many metal AF mermaids around the world. Yeah. There are lots of mermaids. I generally think this is interesting, but I also wonder if this writer will address the problem of like what did kill these goats. I think the implication is like it was mundane causes, like the sort of explanations that were produced by those biologists, like that it was bats, like that these bats were sort of driven to feed on livestock because of drought and stuff like that. I think that's kind of like what they're getting with. All right. So with Dimitri's return, So I was kind of thinking, in reading this, I was just sort of talking about how, I don't like love the sort of like psychoanalytic angle where like it kind of, I think it like there a lot of like academic writing about these type of things like tries to kind of have it both ways where like the people are kind of rational, and I appreciate that, but also it's kind of like, well, you're also sort of like discounting everything they said or assuming this is sort of this like I don't know, like hidden transcript or whatever, like James C. Scott terms. I mean, doing this show has kind of like ruined a lot of like anthropologists, like go-to scholars for me, because every time I hear like James C. Scott, I'm like sus. but like, like I get that, and like definitely I prefer it to like the sort of Radford take, but I do feel like it reminds me of this book. I think it was called like The Resonance of Unseen Things. I think I've mentioned on the show before. I remember someone talking about it back when I was in graduate school. And I remember like, and this was largely about alien experiences. And this book was kind of doing something similar to what we see Derby doing in this article, where she's sort of like almost doing like sort of a close reading of what people say, like where she says like, and he said, it observed him. And this shows, that it's like an anxiety about surveillance that is like being expressed to this creature. And it's like, well,
yeah,
okay, but yeah, like
they're kind of doing a literary reading of the evidence to be like and extrapolating from it. It's like interesting point to kind of like reflect on, but like what did they see? Like like you're kind of ducking the real material question here of like
in fact it does like duck it, and I remember asking this question to my colleague who like kind of had or like my I guess like classmate, as weird as it is to say, my fellow graduate student like back then who like did a presentation on this book and seminar, which was like The Resonance of Unseen Things, which was kind of similar in this way, where it was like kind of doing a deep talking about how like Gray's expressed like fears about immigration or sort of abduction, sort of talking about the abduction of people like in the U.S. Heritage of slavery and things like that. And I was like, well, like, but this book did a similar kind of like ducking maneuver where it wasn't sort of trying to say that like, oh, these experiences didn't happen. It was kind of like avoiding the question and sort of like leaving it open or something. And I'm like, well, if these are real experiences, what is the connection between like the fact that people are being taken from their beds and experimented upon by these beings and the fact that like the US like abducted people from Africa and enslaved them? What does that they continue have to do with each other?
Yeah, or that they continue to use Puerto Rico as like an experimental testing ground for all kinds of like top secret things, and like including medical experiments on people in the 20th century. Like, what is the connection between those things? Because you could go much further than just kind of like a broadly theoretical, almost like literary, analysis where you point out that it kind of evokes like the feeling of living in a surveillance state. It's like, well, they're in a surveillance state. Like they are under like national security rule with no accountability. And like, that's partly why they're like freaked out.
I mean, it kind of, it's interesting because they don't really need to make up a chupacabra. Like they have like plenty of things to like, secret things to sort of, but I guess, it's sort of like, oh, the mystery of the chupacabra points to like a broader secret, kind of like, something escaped like from a lab, something like that. It's like, so it's like kind of a mystery yet to be revealed, but sort of like a tantalizing peek at it, I guess, is maybe the idea. I mean, maybe this is like coherent in a way, but it does make me kind of think about the Mothman, or even about the Jersey Devil, right? And like, it makes me think like, like in Islam, to go to jinn theory here for a little bit, like people always talk about how like jinn are drawn to like pollution, right? And jinn are drawn to like, the bathroom, right? Like, and they're like drawn to like unclean areas, right? Like that's where, jinn sort of breed and dwell, right? Like uncleanliness. That's like,
we're going to get to that in part two,
right?
I think, where if you look at the aesthetics of a certain person, you could see like a jinn would just be like, that's paradise for them. Right. They're just filthy, well,
Well, there is kind of like it, like this kind of is interesting in light of like, I mean, you can even compare Mothman like the TNT area and stuff like that, right? Like, or the sort of like the radiation poisoning and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, what if the reason that like these, there's so much jinn activity in these areas is because like they're not only like, spiritually polluted by like U.S. covert activities, but they're also like physically polluted with like radiation and the sort of the aftermath of these sort of activities and these operations and things like that.
Interesting. Interesting.
I mean, like it would like does create like kind of a connection, like in that sort of squares the circle that is like a missing in a way between what people are talking about, where it's like, okay, well, yeah, but what actually killed those goats? What actually did these people see? Like you're talking like, because it's unsatisfying in a way where you have someone who like swears up and down, like I saw a chupacabra, like it had these feathers, like it's like I am not lying, like people are saying I'm lying, I'm not, like stop it, stop calling me a liar. And then you're like, I understand, like you are in fact a rational, commonsensical actor who has been abused by capitalism, and that is why you're making up this story. It's like kind of
I think
like
people did that around certain like West African ritual practices. Didn't we read some kind of like anthropological books or essays where they were trying to recontextualize like all of like the spiritual traditions in some part of West Africa with actually like anti-colonial, anti-capitalist like resistance that was like undermining the authority of colonial administrators and leaders. And like I seem to recall like while they found like maybe some like specific instances where that might have been the case, like overall like it's a much more complex like that's not necessarily what they were actually doing. Like, but it's like it's a tempting theory. You could see the appeal of it, like, right? Of like, oh, they knew they had like a kind of historical perspective of like what the forces were that were, kind of colonizing them, and they were using these like, traditional indigenous practices in a type of doing a type of resistance that we would recognize in the 21st century. Very like coherently.
Yeah. I mean, and this is such a like a popular and like appealing like academic thing, and this is like kind of like the instrumentalization of like the other. This is like the function that the other has like for academics, like if we're talking about like how like where the other dwells in like the sort of Puerto Rican imaginary or whatever, like where the other is useful for academics is like that they use it to prove their theories, like because like, oh well, the other has never been to like graduate school, so the other has no way of knowing that like how bad capitalism is and how capitalism works. But if I can prove that like the other actually does share my beliefs about capitalism, then that proves my beliefs are right, because like in the same way that's like, why are the pyramids here, like like they're on the other side of the world.
They independently
like,
discovered
like
the same solution,
the same type of thing.
the same answer.
Exactly. So if I can like read into their beliefs like my exact like favorite academic theory, then like there's no better way to prove that theory, right?
Yeah.
So
the kind of you prove the perennialism of your theory, that it's like kind of it sort of existed across time in different contexts because there's like an element of eternal truth about it. Kind of thing. However tempting
which,
it
like,
is,
may be true for certain things, like I think people can obviously, it is like the pyramid principle of like people can independently arrive at the idea of a pyramid. Like some ideas are kind of like elemental enough or basic enough that like they can be arrived at independently without having to have this like extra explanation. But I think you can kind of see like it's an instrumental, it's a like kind of a use of the sort of anthropological object in this way, which I don't like love, and I especially don't like it when it's kind of like deceptive and it tries to kind of have it both ways, we never want to be like they're correct, like they're rational, like we don't want to be condescending, but also like.
But then you're ducking. You're not actually taking them seriously. It's like a tortured way to prove how seriously you're taking like the sort of other, like the colonial subject or whatever. They were the other, without actually like listening to what the fuck they're saying. Like, and like taking them seriously. It's like you're still kind of putting them in like a box or like, in an instrumental position where you're kind of you're still molding like what they're trying to say towards a very like Western, Northern kind of oriented, like a very or a specific academic orientation, and instead of kind of just taking more at face value of people were seeing weird shit and things were, but like livestock were being killed, and there had to be just like, I mean, honestly, it's so similar to like the 1970s and 1980s like cattle ranch mutilations in the American West. I forget what book we were kind of reading about with that, where weren't there ranchers, like they didn't even like ranchers think that this is sort of part of some sinister government conspiracy to like take their land over or something, and they would like shoot at helicopters,
like black helicopters,
and shit, and so many of the same like markers of basically surgical level like incisions, right, that seem to be made with like scalpels and things like that, like medical equipment, the draining of blood, and like the lack of any clear like clues as to like how this was done, but it seemed kind of like sophisticated, right? Like, weren't there, I forget if there are cases where it seemed almost like there were large livestock that were like moved, almost like they had to be hooked up to a helicopter or something and like dragged, to some other location. Like a lot of weird stuff that seemed like, and then mixed with these like kind of UFO abduction kind of stories that people were happening that then, kind of really blew up with like Whitley Strieber and Communion in the late 80s. They adapted that into a movie. And then in the 90s with like the X-Files and like just early kind of internet conspiracy lore, like the kind of idea of like, the anal probes and like UFO. South Park used to make fun of it. And this was, this is right in the middle of that kind of craze about like Area 51 and like Roswell and like little flying saucers. Was really having a big pop culture moment when the Chupacabra thing started to like pop off. But I still wonder about these like abductions and stuff. And like in reading some of from that Princeton website, they do mention that, some of these mutilations look very like surgical, like they were done with like certain medical devices and things like that. And, given that this is a testing ground, this is kind of like the backyard where the U.S. can kind of do whatever it wants. Like, it does make me wonder, was this part of some secret government project for some reason, whether it's like the PSYOP people or they're testing out new technology, like, and then, I mean, did anybody of the Chupacabras, I mean, there were Chupacabras that like walked into people's houses at some point, but like for the most part, it seems like people see the Chupacabra and then they also like, they find livestock that have been murdered. But like, how many times do people see like the Chupacabra like sucking the blood, like literally doing it? You know what I mean?
I don't know. Like, I feel like there must be like stories like that where like, you come upon the Chupacabra and it's like, sucking the blood of like the animal, like, and it's like, and like runs away. But I don't know like what percent of them. Like, I don't know what percent of them are like that. I mean, that's the other thing that like needs to be considered is that like this is, someone in the chat mentioned like the Oswang PSYOP. Like, is this something like that? Or some people kind of try to suggest like Mothman was, I guess, like Mothman could have been something like that. I mean, there's sort of the LSD angle where like I don't think we're dealing with like LSD in either this case or that one, but like still like this could be like some kind of like government psyop. Like, I mean, it would be interesting if like, I mean, when she says like it kind of like works like a robot, it would be interesting if this was some kind of like sophisticated like puppet or something like that.
Like like a little drone people, or something, like an animatronic drone that would run around and be like, and then they could.
It
what
does
if they
seem almost mechanical, like it was hopping but also sort of flying? Like it seems like maybe it was not an animal.
It was one of those Boston Dynamics dogs with like chicken feet attached to it. But like it wouldn't have to be like a drone in the sort of like it's kind of like an RC type of thing, a sophisticated RC thing, like something like the animatronics they made for a movie like Species, like I don't know if they did animatronics or they did CGI for Species, but I mean they definitely had physical effects.
A lot of
right?
CGI, but I think CGI, but I think they did both. I think they made some animatronics and did some CGI. I feel like that's the case with a lot of those movies in the 90s.
Someone in the chat also
like
brought
Independence Day.
Someone in the chat also brought up that apparently Edward Lansdale first put together like the Alpha 66, I think like exile Cuban, like terror group in Puerto Rico. So at least Lansdale, who's the creator of the Oswang PSYOP in the Philippines, where he kind of created like, he relied upon local legends of a kind of vampiric Yeti sort of creature. And then would he take cadavers, or would he just like kidnap and kill people, or like kill like leftist insurgents, and then he would puncture their necks to make it look like they'd been vampirized and like drained of their blood to like psyop, anti-American militants, and all that kind of shit. So we know that they've been playing around with this idea of, and then Operation Wandering Soul in Vietnam during the Phoenix program kind of utilized like similar. More like sonic warfare, but was still kind of trying to like psyop people with like dead ghosts that were, psyoping them and things of that nature. Even the FBI, kind of started dabbling. I think the COINTELPRO, like they started like a a fake New Left faction that sent like threatening like letters with like a beetle image on it, like a scarab. Remember there was like beware, like the sacred scarab or something like that. And like it came out later, there's like FBI people just like riffing on like they're like, we could leverage like new age, like the new age popularity within like the new left to like psyop everybody into thinking like we're like casting spells on them or something. yeah. There's a
it
long
shows the
history
scarab, which was this sort of Egyptian hieroglyph for Kheper,
Oh.
the word of power, the Temple of Set.
Interesting.
Anyway,
a guy who worked on the kind of spiritual psyops. Yeah. So, I mean, I could think about like Operation Condor and like the Contras and like all of the kind of School of America's Latin American death squads around, that really just were blossoming like in the 1980s and even into the early 1990s. Like this was an era where there's a lot of activity and Puerto Rico is like a great staging ground for Latin America special ops, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Like the military is a huge presence there. The Navy.
This is Roman kind of has a take that's like sort of like I think like he actually kind of like takes issue with like Derby's sort of argument, and it's pretty interesting. Like he talks about he talks about his mother and how she would always say like when the Chupacabra would come up, she would say like how people are here, and kind of uses that as like a way and to talk about it. She says. He says, my mother did not dismiss the news of mysterious animal deaths. Unlike other critics, she never referred to the reports as fantasies. But she saw the media's sensational coverage and the appetites it whetted as symptoms of excesses that afflicted and defined the island. Even as it drew precious fluids from backyard animals, no less, the Chupacabras revealed Puerto Ricans' prodigality. Opportunism, credulity, and disbelief spilled over with every turn of the narrative. She assured me that she was not surprised when politicians and pundits and desordenados, literally disorderly but also disrespectful people, began to appear wherever the Chupacabras was spotted, looking to conjure opportunities amid the din. Political stalemate, a stifling water shortage, and crime's rising tide were suffocating the island. Chupacabras offered a respite. Surely, elected officials were grateful for headlines that drew attention away from their failings. Newspaper editors had reasons to rejoice too. The mysterious attacks were doing more for circulation figures and another expose of corruption or scandalous politicking ever could. At least that is what our long-distance accounting suggested. The evidence of collusion between the press and politicians may have been circumstantial, but it was abundant. The first paper to offer daily coverage of the Chupacabras was El Vocero, a San Juan tabloid that still prints its headlines in blood-red lettering. El Vocero's reputation for yellow journalism gave us pause, even if we, like most other readers, did not know of the events of 1975. That was the year when the Association of Journalists reprimanded El Vocero reporter Augusto Arvale Salinas for his lurid stories concerning the first of the island's 20th century bloodsuckers. Association president Tomas Stella charged that Vale's coverage of the vampire that, quote-unquote, terrorized the western town of Mocha harked back to an unspecified time when, quote, falsehood and obscurantism went uncontested. The editors of El Vocero denied the charges. Sensational or not, the reports met a public need, and they urged the authorities to find answers. The editors conceded, however, that the stories had helped the daily reach a circulation of nearly 90,000 copies during its first year of publication. If the throngs of reporters that covered the Chupacabras in the 1990s recalled El Vampiro de Mocha and the censures that followed it, they cast their recollections aside to tend to the business at hand. After the mayor of Canovanas began organizing safaris, even the editors of the San Juan Star, who had largely refused to join the fray, ran several pieces on the subject. These ranged from glib op-ed columns to historically minded news analyses. The latter cited experts such as the founding director of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, archaeologist Ricardo Alegria. Alegria reportedly contended that the sightings had an ancestry that, quote, stemmed back to the beginnings of Puerto Rican society and the cultures from which modern Puerto Rican as written, was formed. In the next months, the Chupacabras made appearances in all Puerto Rican dailies, in the New York Times, the Washington Post, El Figaro, and the Herald Tribune, to name a few other notable newspapers. Mayor Jose Ramon Jimo Soto announced on 25th October 1995 that he intended to take the Chupacabras alive. He would use nets, tranquilizer darts, and a large cage adorned with steel scrolls, evidently the handiwork of a burglar bar shop. Initially, Soto explained his extraordinary undertaking as in the usual fashion. The people of Canovanas, a northeastern municipality located a short distance from the jagged edge of the capital sprawl, had suffered significant material losses and incalculable anxieties. As first executive, Soto was duty-bound to protect its citizenry. Canovana's residents deserved answers. In addition, Soto noted, an expedition could yield invaluable scientific data. Rumor had it that unseen scientists working for an agency of the U.S. government had engineered the predator in a genetics laboratory. Extraterrestrial origins were alleged too. According to Mayor Soto, as unlikely as an advocate of the Enlightenment as had been seen in recent years, such contentions required investigation. Soto's plan for the deployment of a small force of 20 off-duty police officers supplemented with personnel from the Civil Defense and Natural Resources Department. On the designated evening, however, self-appointed volunteers outnumbered the mayor's men 10-1. More than 200 citizens, many of them carrying sticks, machetes, and firearms, scattered to search for the chupacabras as journalists watched over the scene. As many had hoped, a group of hunters caught a glimpse of the chupacabras near a creek in Barrio Campo Rico. Contrary to the mayor's wishes, they did not attempt to capture the predator. Instead, they fired their weapons at once. El Vocero, writing in a strained Law and Order register, censured the volunteers for endangering nearby residents. Soto later claimed that area residents were responsible for the shots. As luck would have it, the volley missed neighbors and chupacabras alike. The shooters, a group that did not include Soto or his subalterns, saw a shadowy figure slip into a large drainage pipe. The evasive maneuver was credit to the predator's well-publicized agility. The flight also called attention, albeit indirectly, to the water shortage that afflicted Canovanas and that Soto had denounced days earlier. The chupacabras had escaped through a dry sewerage line. In the months and years that followed, the hunt for the mysterious killer revealed grievances of other sorts. Melba Rivera, Soto's political rival, condemned the expedition as a publicity stunt. She called for an investigation to determine if the mayor had misused public funds to finance what she described as a staged act resembling an old episode of Fantasy Island. But the denunciation did not have desired effects. No such inquest was carried out, and the voters re-elected Soto in 1996, 2000, and 2004. Meanwhile, the chupacabras went on a killing spree that left behind thousands of carcasses with telltale puncture wounds to the neck and occasional signs of mutilations. Attacks were reported in every one of Puerto Rico's municipalities, including the islands of Vieques and Culebra. By May 1996, the international press and Spanish-language television networks based in the United States were reporting sightings in Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and the United States. To describe the profusion of chupacabra sightings, commentators employed metaphors of contagion. A chupacabra's fever was said to be spreading, presumably among consumers of the media's tainted products. Others, writing in the editorial pages of newspapers and electronic bulletin boards, suggested that panic had seized hold of people predisposed by history to maladies of ratiocination. In Puerto Rico, however, the hunt for the chupacabras gave rise to satirical performances that respectable newscasters portrayed as inconsequential sideshows. In these episodes, witnesses and bystanders did more than read and watch. They lampooned the mechanisms through which their demands for explanations, protection, and government transparency were transformed into news items, turned into cause for fruitless inquiries by committee, and transmogrified into the stuff of partisan jockeying. One might argue, as I do, in the epilogue, that through their participation in safaris, broadcasts, and the circulation of rumors, citizens ensnared government officials that engaged each other in open-ended dialogues of the political order. These conversations differed from others that broached such topics. Among other things, they could not be brought to a close with sound bites and partisan formulae. Although oppositional notes were discernible in the citizen satire, the Chupacabra stories did more than voice critiques of millennial capitalism and Puerto Rico's enduring subjection to neocolonial rule. The rumors surrounding Puerto Rico's bloodsuckers pointed at occult economies and the history of imperial designs, as Robin Derby has shown. But they also spoke crassly in a tongue that scholarly translations have muffled. The dominant interpretation describes Puerto Rico's bloodsuckers in a neo-functionalist idiom that limits expressive possibilities. The Chupacabras is said to be one more monster in the bestiary that latter-day capitalism has roused around the globe. Although this is not a book about the Chupacabras, the analyses that follow betray its passage through Puerto Rico and its far-flung networks. It was in talking and musing about the elusive killer that I came to the central concern of this account. Put plainly, these pages deal with the government of so-called superstitions in Puerto Rico and Cuba during the first half of the 20th century. In the episodes discussed below, all of them media events in some fashion, journalists, politicians, intellectuals, and the public, a corporate actor that the various parties invoked to tenacious ends, engaged in a complex exchange over matters of belief. As in the case of the Chupacabras, issues of citizenship and governance were implicated. In these instances, however, direct linkages were forged between misbelief, fantasy, and religious forms that authorities found objectionable. African-derived quote-unquote witchcraft, spiritism, popular Catholicism, and the alleged jumble of fraudulent healing practices going by the catch-all curanderismo fell under renewed suspicion in the early 20th century, shortly after the formal declaration of religious freedom and the expansion of citizenship rights. And he goes on to kind of the history of Puerto Rican spiritualism and kind of these different sort of religious events that have happened. I feel like just for time's sake, since we're doing 3 episodes today, I do want to read like from the epilogue here, but I'll skip to it. Even though I recommend this book, Governing Spirits. The introduction's good.
It sounds very interesting.
Yeah. I think people get the main point, but I'll go to the epilogue where he talks a little bit more about the Chupacabra. A few years ago, the renowned anthropologists Jean and John Komarov called attention to the rise of a new planetary species of monstrous beings, given the conflating, quote, the virtual with the veritable, the cinematic with the scientific, gods with Godzillas, the prophetic with the profitable. The Komarovs proposed the sightings of uncanny fauna reported around the world in the last decade are linked to the conquest of neoliberalism, an economic arrangement that many have experienced as paradoxical. Under this post-Fordist dispensation, consumption itself can appear to generate wealth more readily than manufacturing and trade, the mainstays of 19th century capitalism. The new breeds, the Komarovs maintain, have come to fill the epistemic voids that crop up where globalizing designs find their local articulations. To post-apartheid South Africans and those who have experienced a new world order as deprivation and post-revolutionary disillusionment, these beasts have revealed the inner works of the new economy. Magical transactions account for fortunes that seem to come out of nowhere. The newly enriched are even said to resort to witchcraft to siphon off the productive vitality of their victims.
Folks,
yeah. More than bearing witness, today's monsters attest these macabre machinations as co-conspirators. As the Komarovs portray them, the creatures themselves are symptoms of the growth of occult economies. They point out that recent decades have seen the emergence of generative consumerism and the proliferation of hidden avenues to wealth accumulation that include pyramid schemes, gruesome traffic in human organs, and the alleged exploitation of zombie labor. The Howick monster, a 25-foot creature said to inhabit the Howick Falls in South Africa, speaks to the role that monstrous beings play in the occult trades. The beast has helped a lucky few to amass monster money, largely the proceeds of commerce with tourists who visit the falls hoping to catch a glimpse. I believe in Mothman money, like that guy said. Yeah. Puerto Rico's infamous Chupacabras bears a family resemblance to the South African Leviathan. Like others in the contemporary bestiary, the gargoyle-like goat sucker made news in the 1990s. By then, the contradictions between the promise of late capitalism and postmodern pessimism had become plain enough to herald the consolidation of what the Komarovs dub the age of utilitarianism. A shadowy predator of uncertain origin, the Chupacabras left goats, cabras, and thousands of backyard animals drained of their blood. Their remains appeared as if they had been sucked dry, chupar. Although the headlines detailed losses to farmers and animal owners, the Chupacabras brought a good deal of monster money too. Lacking a fixed habitation, the attacker did not stimulate a boom in tourism. But impresarios made quick returns selling novelties to memorialize the killings, which soon spread beyond Puerto Rico to reach hemispheric proportions. From Tijuana to Miami to Santiago de Chile, entrepreneurs stamped likenesses of the Chupacabras on shampoo bottles, Halloween masks, and T-shirts. Media concerns ranging from local newspapers to international broadcasting networks made a lively trade in Chupacabra stories as well. Such similarities notwithstanding, there are reasons for questioning the usefulness of the Komarovs model for understanding the Chupacabras and the specters that prowled about Cuba and Puerto Rico in the first half of the 20th century. It is true that scholars have not proposed a taxonomical scheme that would group man-gods, brujos, and bloodsuckers within a single class. Nevertheless, the rise of all these figures has long invited neo-functionalist analyses. Accounts that would explain the popularization of non-rational propositions in terms of shifts of economic and political structures are common and often very insightful. My aim isn't to deny the significance of political economies through the ecologies representations discussed in this book, nor is it my intent to contest the rise of economies of the occult as such. Instead, I want to begin by echoing Isaac Nehos's recent call to recognize that the zombies and witches of the South African Lowveld, and one might add Puerto Rico's Chupacabras to the list of the denizens of the occult, derive their broad appeal from indeterminacy that defies interpretive control. In seizing upon a single meaning among a profusion of possibilities, analysts risk obscuring contradictions and dissonances between narratives of preternatural depredations and the social actions that accompany those narratives. As Niehaus has observed, the generic stories that late 20th century South Africans tell of zombie-making witches do point at the illegitimate enrichment of some people at the expense of others. These stories also recall the history of dislocations, including the creation of ethnic homelands and schemes that promoted labor migration, which helped bring those inequalities about. Niehaus cautions, however, that when witchcraft accusations are voiced in the Lowveld, they are not aimed at the wealthy, as the stories lead one to expect. Instead, the denunciations point at the impoverished persons who are singled out by more prosperous neighbors, convinced that those in desperate straits must resort to witchcraft to subsist. In other words, social actions may defy and even contradict the meanings that narratives of occult dealings put forth. In accounting for the Chupacabras, it is useful to differentiate between the discourses of attacks and sightings, which are multivocal in their own right, and the social actions that Puerto Ricans have pursued in connection to those accounts. This approach reveals that Chupacabra's narratives are often diagnostic of the excesses of the government of the United States and Puerto Rico, an unincorporated commonwealth that is neither independent nor a state of the American Union. Social actions, however, do not pit witnesses and victims of the Chupacabra against imperious agents of American neoliberalism. In searching for the Chupacabras and its kin, Puerto Ricans have engaged Commonwealth politicians, state functionaries, and even journalists, goading them into exchanges that dramatize the fractious relationships between the island's government and the citizenry it claims to serve. As I proceed, I am mindful that the distinction between discourse and social action, though useful, should not be reified. Like the figures discussed in the preceding chapters, the Chupacabra shows that the circulation of stories, news, and rumors is a kind of social intervention, with various effects on conduct and politics. The analysis I offer below calls attention to satirical elements of the Chupacabra's episode. In doing this, I want to highlight a tendency that Niehaus has observed also, namely the dominant takes in the occult discount satire, forcing conclusions on discourses do not always offer closure. The commoners have dismissed out of hand the, quote, lurid and salacious appearance of the new breed. They affirm only that only from the, quote, cool distance of the academy could one think of the Howick monster in terms of satire and ignore the extent to which fantastical beings resonate with the experiences of ordinary people living in post-colonial societies. To this, the anthropologists add a necessary reminder. Occult transactions should not be dismissed as laughing matters, especially when they can be seen to generate quotidian and extraordinary forms of violence, including mob justice for those accused of dealing in the occult. The Commonwealths are not the only influential scholars to dismiss the vulgar on the grounds that rumors of unspeakable ravages give metaphorical expression to real experiences. The literature on organ theft rumors shares this tendency too. Nancy Shepard-Hughes has argued that Latin Americans' persistent talk of people kidnapped for their body parts voices anxieties generated by an all-too-real global trade in organs for transplants. Such assertions have their critics, but few have attempted to recover the lurid for analysis. Stephen Palamy, for instance, has argued that rumors that speak of threats to bodily integrity are better understood as analytical devices that allow those who experience commodification in their own bodies to produce spontaneous historiographies. Louise White, for her part, is aimed to subvert the logic of Shepard-Hughes' interpretation. She argues that one might see instances of a literal traffic in organs as lending credibility to the rumors, rather than a reason for their demythification. Interpreting specters only as explanations and glosses on intensely experienced deprivations may oversimplify the processes through which witches, wizards, and monsters have come to life in Puerto Rico. One might object on empirical grounds that by the 1990s, Puerto Ricans were well acquainted with neoliberalism and with such occult dealings as drug trafficking and government corruption. In that sense, there is limited evidence of the existence of an epistemic void that the Chupacabras might be said to fill. Good point. My concern, however, is that the Chupacabras and its predecessors may better be seen as resulting from collective engagement in shifting ecologies of representations. The narratives about the Chupacabras are not only attempts by the victims of history to make sense of their plight, they are also manifestations of an evolving political rationality that has conjured allegedly irrational practices only to dispose of them. These tasks, which Talal Assad has declared essential to modern statecraft, have helped to constitute, quote, the secular and, quote, the sacred into distinct domains susceptible to management. More to the point, these efforts have required the intervention of journalists, politicians, and experts who have, in effect, co-authored the discourses of the occult while insisting on the existence of credulous misbelievers. Rather than ask how those who encountered the Chupacabras came to believe in its existence, I am interested in exploring how the notion of a credulous population was sustained and put into circulation. I argue that the allegedly credulous upset the usual, quote, hierarchies of credibility to reveal state officials and journalists as the most literal-minded parties involved in the constitution of the occult. Framing the matter in this fashion, I part company with Niehaus, whose essay attempts to ascertain the subjective conditions that explain why so many South Africans experience witchcraft narratives as plausible and indeed as real. So, he goes on to talk about how, because like various examples of this, but how this kind of idea of the chupacabras was used, like kind of in the sort of the example of the sort of sewer system that you mentioned in the introduction, to kind of, send up or subvert the like journalistic and political narratives. This is like an example. He talks about Soto's activities here. The Chupacabras played the part of a carnival diablito, leading revelers in performances that amounted to biting satires of well-governed citizenship. Eyewitnesses and those willing to credit them pitted their own stories and the rumors they had overheard against the versions the officials put forth. Hearsay, what passed for facts, circulated in tit-for-tat exchanges, quite unlike the hermetic monologues described in many sociological studies of conspiracy thinking. These performances dramatized the absurdity of the prescribed modes of communication between citizens, politicians, and civil servants. Functionaries faced with the uncanniness of reports referred those who required assistance from one branch of the bureaucracy to the next, reminding citizens that the Department of Agriculture handled complaints related to the death of domestic animals, while the Department of Natural Resources was responsible for wildlife, unless, of course, the event had occurred on federal land. In such cases, the Park Service or the military would have to be contacted. Much of the exchange between citizens and the government concerned the historical record, or put more trenchantly, what historian Louise White calls the usable past. Those eager to discount the stories called attention to Puerto Rico's folklore and the islanders' penchant for superstition. They concerned themselves with questions of origins and reminded the public that the Chupacabras was the latest in a series of preternatural predators. It was generally agreed that the most recent flare-up had occurred in 1975. At that time, a flying, blood-sucking creature similar to the Chupacabras had gone on a killing spree that claimed hundreds of animals. El Vocero, blah, 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 sort of propounded this. Those who were persuaded that something was amiss did not deny the parallels between the Chupacabras and the Vampiro, but they made a different use of the past. In the historical record, they found evidence of unsolved mysteries that demanded resolution. Rather than explain the Chupacabras, history suggested to them that the rumors, with their talk of government cover-ups, made plausible claims. In their review, they had occasion to reveal many moments when the relationship between officials and citizens had shown itself to be grotesque. Action and inaction suggested the authorities had something to hide. The official response to the Chupacabras called into question the government's interest in fact-finding and exposed its efforts to drape a veil of transparency over a pile of carcasses that grew to enormous proportions in a matter of months. By April 1996, the Chupacabras had claimed more than 2,000 victims in Puerto Rico alone. Although politicians claimed to seek the truth, they were quick to offer explanations that failed to account for the countless details that eyewitnesses put before them. If feral dogs or imported predators had killed the animals, as the government's experts insisted, why had no blood been spilled in the attacks? What about the surgical precision of the wounds? What about the missing genitalia? If human beings had done this, why did the remains not exhibit rigor mortis? And what about the UFO sightings that accompanied attacks? Confronted with a surfeit of information that could not be accepted as evidence, government officials ceased collecting the carcasses that animal owners saved in the name of science and good citizenship. On those occasions when remains and testimonies were collected, the authorities failed to disclose their findings. If the legislature ever produced the report that Soto and his colleagues requested, it was never made public, nor were the results of necropsies performed on the victims of the Chupacabras ever released. Veterinarians with Puerto Rico's Department of Agriculture spoke to the press, but they held on to their records. The absence of sanctioned data did not pose an impediment to the revelry or to private investigations. Ufologists in the tabloid press found their own veterinarian in Dr. Carlos Soto, a private practitioner with offices in Toa Alta. His necropsies, some of which were videotaped for broadcast, concluded that no known predator could be blamed for the mounting death toll. The Vacillon, however, moved on without need of titled experts. With a bit of perverse wit, even an empty cage can be made to speak of a monstrous presence. In November of 1995, it was said that a couple had managed to capture a goatsucker and kept it for 6 days in their home in San Lorenzo's Barrio Hato. Regrettably, by the time researchers and reporters made their way to the house, the creature was still gone. Still, the story did not disappoint partisans of the Chupacabras. The vacant cage was discussed avidly. In many ways, it was the very point of the narrative. This is because, according to the couple, a group of police officers and unidentified government agents, Puerto Ricans by their reckoning, had seized their captive, which had turned out to be a surprisingly small and tame animal. True to their image, police officers warned the couple to remain silent, adding that if they spoke out, they would suffer financial losses. Inspectors would declare the couple's rental property contaminated because the government would break its lease. Because this and other rumors traced a clear line of demarcation between salt-of-the-earth eyewitnesses and abusive naysayers in government, it bears an underscoring that the Vacillon, as discourse and as social action, often bridge the divide. One need only recall that mayors, legislators, and police officers took part in the revelry and contributed to the rumors. their participation was not always unwitting. So you can kind of see, I think you kind of see the example of like sort of the collusion of the press and the politicians to kind of like use the Chupacabra story, like from the example he gives in the introduction with like Alvocero and Soto and things like that. I'll see if there's like another example from later on, but I think like it is kind of like, it's interesting. It's kind of, again, like, it's not obviously this guy's been putting forward a gin theory in any way. However, like the idea that like this sort of like notion of like a credulous, like a peasant population in a way was actually sort of like, exploited and used kind of like in almost like a playing dumb kind of manner to sort of show like the inadequacy of these, these like official explanations that were being offered and these official attempts to solve the problem, like regardless of obviously the different encounters that Chupacabra run the gamut, but
in some of these cases they were sort of like having they were taking the piss out of like public officials by being like, oh, the Chupacabra escaped in that canal because of the historic drought we have, which is like the government's fault, or something like that along those lines. And then people kind of misinterpret it as like like it's kind of a selectively interpreting them literally, and then like not interpreting them literally other times, but like in a very instrumental kind of way that you can always portray them as like simple, superstitious folk, like peasant folk, no matter like, like they're not capable of like taking the piss out of you and like kind of like fucking with you a little bit, and like having a sense of humor about it. And at the same time, they're also like, they are fully capable of just like saying what happened to them or like what they experienced. But then that is like, that's like actually, there's all these different management strategies of being like, well, they didn't like really mean that. Like, and it's like, no, there was a little bloodsucker in my window. But,
it's
very
like,
tangled.
Yes, it's like two kind of different like approaches to it, but like there isn't like quite a take that sort of like suggests that like where like is the reality of this, because that's like totally, I mean, this is like why Aswal Jihad is a podcast, because like it's like totally outside the academic discourse to suggest something like that. I mean, you can maybe kind of play around with the sort of psyop idea. Like, he mentions some people like, okay, well, the traffic in organs, the anxieties about that are based on the actual traffic in organs. Like, that's like one thing to say, like, oh, this might have been like an Oswald psyop without kind of like sort of a firm, like a clear evidence. You can't like, that's kind of still itself like beyond the pale, and especially to say like, well, maybe it's because of the spiritual and physical contamination that we have the proliferation of jinn, like kind of on this pathway of like U.S. covert operations, right? But those things too are both kind of outside the pale of, or beyond the pale of academic discourse, or outside the kind of horizon of possibilities of like anthropological academic analysis. But but it is like like I think it's interesting. Like there's kind of a glimpse of it in Romo's. I mean, his book is interesting, like in his kind of take on the idea that like when he says like, okay, well then, but wait a minute, like these explanations aren't adequate. Like you're not actually explaining what's going on, right? And that could be like, but they're not making up these things. Like these things actually did happen. Like these like animals are dead. Like they're
right.
Actually,
Somebody killed thousands of animals.
Yeah,
and
right, or like something killed it, right? I mean, really, it is I mean, very appropriately for a vampire, it is like the epitome of Dracularity, right? Where like the explanations that are offered like are not adequate, like to the thing, and like this is kind of like almost a I like kind of the idea that like this sort of Dracularity has almost been turned against like the implementers of Plan Dracula to kind of sort of show that like they can't like control the discourse. Even though obviously they also like did use the Chupacabra narrative, it kind of creates this. I mean, again, I'm not like a big like fan of like the Bakhtian like carnival thing. I don't know if like that's really what he's kind of trying to gesture towards. Like, but the sort of a suspension of the rules of like carnival, but like in a way like it's true, like bringing a cryptid into it in the same way that like the Epstein stuff kind of functions in U.S. political discourse now. I mean, it's just the example that occurs to me. It does kind of create this like sort of suspension of like the normal rules of political discourse, like where everything kind of like falls. I mean,
we are seeing that
see it,
now that it's
yeah,
broken certain normie containment. Like you can talk about this issue and entertain things about like what if the intelligence agencies like are running a global like pedophile blackmail ring that controls every organ of our culture. Like suddenly, you can, and both sides are kind of like have been, doing that. But then still outside of the Epstein issue, maybe some people are kind of like warming up to the idea of like maybe looking at, everything in that light. But like there's still kind of, until relatively recently, there was this like containment wall that like that's not serious. Like you can't talk about that in academia. You can't talk about that in corporate media or nonprofit foundation media, right? Like you are resigned to these like angel cities, GeoCities, Angel Fire websites and stuff like, certainly back in the 90s, when this stuff was happening, or it had to be treated in the realm of fiction, like in Species or the X-Files or something. But yeah, it is interesting now. By the way, talk about a Puerto Rico connection. I did see an email from the latest drop, which we'll go through the Epstein stuff later this week on Thursday. But I did see one email from a certain Brock Pierce to Jeffrey Epstein, kind of boasting that he had bought a property, an old colonial property that he said was the oldest like Freemasonic temple at least in Puerto Rico. I don't know if he said like the Americas, but like definitely the oldest one in Puerto Rico. Brock Pierce, crypto impresario Brock Pierce was bragging to Epstein about that. So, and Brock Pierce, talk about modern colonialism, crypto colonialism. He moved, down to Puerto Rico in the late 2010s, and I don't know if he's still there like full time, but he was kind of doing this like ayahuasca cult, like crypto thing, like Burning Man thing. He wanted to call it Puertopia, etc. And he was chit chatting with Jeffrey Epstein the whole time. But anyways, I think we'll probably switch over soon. I did think it might be good to read one more, just a little bit from the Princeton Chupacabra website, from just to get some of that 90s flavor, because actually I did want to
like
I just want to read a little bit from the Jorge.
I do love those. Yeah,
this is a real old school crunchy article, but it's got some good stuff in it. And I didn't realize when we kind of programmed today's triple episodes that like it didn't really occur to me till a little while ago when we were talking that all of them take place in almost the like exactly precise like time period we're going to be talking about. All three episodes like kind of 1995 to like 1997. There's a lot of opportunities to like examine the media from that period of time when we were still like kids, but that was when I was getting on the internet for the first time. So I remember these kind of websites,
I mean, I remember like, as people who listen to the show know, I've had like a lifelong like interest in cryptids, and like I remember I probably went to that website like in the 90s. Like, exactly. Like it was all over the Chupacabra thing. Yeah.
I was playing the Area 51 arcade game, at the pizza parlor, and everything was UFOs, this and that. And it was kind of a fun thing that people like to talk about, because we did have a president. We had Bill Clinton, who's the first maybe Jimmy Carter said something about UFOs.
He did say
he saw a UFO.
He saw one. Yeah, he could not identify it.
I couldn't identify it.
Yeah,
but then Bill Clinton was kind of a little bit, he got harangued. He got invited out to Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch in Wyoming, where apparently he was like Lawrence Rockefeller was like hectoring like Bill and Hillary about like declassifying all the UFO files so you could see them and shit like that. But this is an interesting article because it kind of touches on a couple like possibilities, and I'd say it's kind of it's like pretty noited in a good way, and it addresses a lot of things that I feel like some of these academic articles, for all their other theoretical strengths, kind of like sidestep a little bit. Some of the evidence. I don't know if this has been subsequently like debunked or whatever, but I'll just read a little bit. It mentions Dr. Carlos Soto, a veterinarian, who like examined and shared like his reports about what they were. So let's see here. Somebody actually said, Angel Luis Santana, a veterinarian at the private Gardenville clinic in San Juan said, "It could be a human being who belongs to a religious sect, even another animal. It could also be someone who wants to make fun out of the Puerto Rican people." All of the above official explanations to the enigma have failed to identify the manner in which the animals died, and the observations made of unknown creatures by serious, reliable witnesses all over Puerto Rico. The facts tell a very different story. The animals have been found with many small, perfect circular holes, about a quarter to a half inch in diameter, arranged in pairs of triangular fashion. These penetrate deep into the neck of lower jaws of the victims. Dr. Carlos Soto, a qualified veterinarian, states the wounds have a regular pattern in many of the cases into the head of the animal, a hole penetrating through the right jawbone, muscle, and tissue, and straight into the brain, more specifically directly to the cerebellum, puncturing it and causing instant death to the animal. This regular type of wound, and the path followed by whatever intrudes into the body, indicates premeditation and intelligence. Of great interest, the attack reveals a type of euthanasia technique, for this method prevents the attacked animal from suffering. This, too, revealed intelligence. Official research fails to explain the following. If a dog or any known animal predator bites to kill a victim, it must first exert pressure on both sides of the head, neck, or body. In the Chupacabra case files, no trauma, abrasions, scratches, bites, or pressure have been observed by the examiners on the opposite side of the wound, and as such, it becomes obvious we are not dealing with an ordinary predator-carnivore species known to science. The wounds may be similar in appearance to bites inflicted by dogs or baboons due to them being round and small, but the similarity ends there. Government officers and vets who have followed the official line or policy statements have often refused to reveal data about the wounds. They conveniently ignored the fact that whatever penetrates the animal is at least 3 or 4 inches long, and in a few cases has been known to cauterize the wall of the wound, apparently to prevent excessive blood loss. No known animal species on Earth can do this. Some wounds of this type appear on the sides and belly of the victim. This penetration usually cuts through the stomach, down to the liver, apparently removing sections of the organ and absorbing liquid from it. Such actions would require an incision of up to 5 inches, a fact verified during necropsies performed on the animals. Whilst something obviously penetrates the animal, creating extensive trauma and injury, and leaving strange material inside the tissue, no natural inflammatory processes have been observed in the dead animal tissue. This is extremely unnatural. In most cases, the victims lack rigor mortis and remain flexible days after their death. Incredibly, in some incidents, the blood which remained in the body would not clot or coagulate for days following death. Several larger holes or cuts have been discovered on some animals. These consist of wounds which range from 1 inch in diameter to 12 inches in length. Blah, blah, blah. These particular openings have been located in the neck, chest, belly, and anal areas and appear to have been made with a surgeon's scalpel. Clean-cut openings through which certain organs are excised from the bodies. Reproductive sexual organs, anus, eyes, other soft tissue have all been removed. Another official explanation identifies the possibility, how about this, that someone involved in a religious or satanic sect may be responsible. But the sheer number of cases appears to negate this potential. Well, not so fast. We'll see about that. The killings occur every day at all hours and all over the island. There's no single sect which has anything like the resources to conduct such an act. Only the government could conduct such an operation. But what possible reasons would they have to do this? So, I mean, it couldn't probably be a satanic sect unless there's a satanic sect maybe working for the government. There's a PSYOP officer. No, I guess he had just retired. But, interesting. So anyways, going on, this starts to get a little weirder. Many of the killings are associated with strange creatures we have called anomalous biological entities, ABEs. Mm-hmm. This is reportedly a cross between a creature known as a gray alien humanoid and what most witnesses describe as the body of a bipedal erect dinosaur with no tail. Its head is oval in shape and has an elongated jaw. 2 elongated red eyes have been reported, together with small holes in the nostril area, a small slit-like mouth with fang-type teeth protruding upwards and downwards from the jaw. Other witnesses have seen small pointed ears, but this feature has not been seen by other witnesses. It appears to have strong coarse hair all over its body, but it has the remarkable ability to change colors at will, almost like a chameleon. So then it's got the little claws. It can leap over trees. It can jump really high. Some people say the creature's legs look almost reptilian or goat-like. That it has fleshy membranes running down its back. Some people say it might be able to fly or at least like glide. But how about, okay, going on here. First reported in the town of Orocovis, the ABEs have been sighted in the municipality of Canovanas and in many areas of Puerto Rico. It's been seen in day and night time. Madeline Tolentino was one in the Campo Rico community. At 3 in the afternoon, they saw it, like walking down the street. The killings are a great loss to farmers, and the situation has prompted the president of the Puerto Rico House of Representatives Agricultural Commission, Mr. Juan Lopez, to introduce a resolution asking for an official investigation to clarify the situation. At this time, it has been brought to my attention that at least 2 of these creatures have been captured, parentheses, exclamation point, by government officers, both from the U.S. federal government and the Puerto Rican government. They were captured before the 6th and 7th of November. Both were alive and allegedly taken to the U.S. by special personnel. Our government keeps denying the facts, yet our people perceive they are being lied to. The killings and encounters with these creatures continue. It is probably due to the fact that the incidents are associated with UFOs that the government continues to cover up the facts. So now we get into some weird shit. Sightings. Luminous oval and pyramidal-shaped UFOs have been seen in the vicinity where animals have been mutilated and found to be without blood. These have been reported in the towns of Cabo Rojo, Canovanas, Ponce, and Naranjito, distances apart. In Barrio Hato, the Rojas family observed a UFO. A horse and several goats were found mutilated shortly after the observation. On November 18, 1995, a luminous disk some 40 feet in diameter with a row of dark, quote, windows around its center rim positioned itself over the antennae of Radio Procer, a radio station located in the town of Barranquitas in the center of Puerto Rico. Simultaneously, the station's electronic equipment went crazy. Dials just went wild. Incredibly, an obsolete piece of equipment from 1957 stored at the station turned itself on. More astonishingly was the fact that the apparatus was not plugged into any power source. This incident was discussed in the media as many residents in that area saw the UFO as it hovered over the station. Sadly, the TV, radio, and news media suppressed the information on several encounters. Channel 4 and Channel 11 covered the incident but failed to mention the presence of creatures during the sighting. This implies a cover-up. Then another woman saw a different ABE kind of object flying around, or they saw a Chupacabra ABE jumping, and then it entered a round luminous object over her car. Now, next part here, a little creepy, genetic manipulations. The reports suggest a link between the ABEs and UFOs or alien phenomena, but we cannot discard the possibility that ABEs can also be the product of highly sophisticated genetic manipulation by human agencies. A Chinese-Russian scientist by the name of Dr. Xian Kenshin has produced genetic manipulations which have created new species of electronically crossed plant and animal organisms. Kenshin developed an electronic system whereby he can pick up the bioenergetic field of the DNA of living organisms and transfer it electronically to other living organisms. It's funny, it sounds like what CRISPR is now, but I don't know if this is what they're describing. By these means, he has created incredible new breeds of ducks/chickens with physical characteristics of both species, goats/rabbits, and new breeds of plants such as corn, wheat, peanut, sunflower seeds, and cucumber watermelons. These are produced by linking the genetic data of different living organisms contained in their bioenergetic fields by means of ultra-high frequencies, of biological linking. If the Russians have created this technology, then without a doubt the U.S. and other powers have too. Therefore, it's quite possible that the, quote, Chupacabras, or ABEs, could have been developed by humans. Now, this next paragraph, under experiments and blood tests, this is important for what's coming up next. Puerto Rico has been the site for much experimentation by the United States on the island's population and territory for decades. Examples of this can be found in the experimentation of thalidomida, an anti-conceptive drug, contraceptive drugs on our women, which caused the birth of many malformed children in the 1950s. The lethal Agent Orange and other dioxin-based chemical agents were tested in several places on the island, as well as gamma radiation tests in our forests. Because of this, we can't exclude the possibility that someone may well be experimenting with new and advanced genetic products in our country. The ABEs could be the result, and has gone awry. Who knows? Perhaps the creatures have escaped, and that someone has lost control of the situation. We obtained samples of blood allegedly from one of the creatures, which was discovered after it jumped over a fence and tripped. This occurred at 9 p.m. on October 3rd, 1995, in Campo Rico. 2 days before, a policeman shot one of the creatures in Campo Rico, which fled the site. The blood could have well been from that ABE. We took the blood sample to a medical specialist and hopefully for DNA analysis. These tests are currently underway in the U.S., but here are the preliminary results. Sample 1. The original blood sample seemed to indicate similar characteristics to that of human A-type blood with Rh factor. Further analysis was not conclusive. Sample 2. Other analysis of blood and matter associated to it in the sample showed a material content comparable to feces with detritus, E. coli bacteria, and worms, and other parasites. And sample 3, the genetic analysis, found the blood is in no way compatible with human blood, nor with any human animal species known to science. The trace ratio of magnesium, phosphorus, calcium, and potassium are incompatible with those of normal human blood. They are much too high. The albumin-gluline Rg ratio is also incompatible. The ratios found do not allow the results of the analysis to be compatible with those of any known animal species. So it says we can't compare it to anything, therefore it could well be the product of a highly sophisticated genetic manipulation, an organism alien to our environment, or perhaps extraterrestrial. Now, the next one is disinformation and concealment. Obviously, the alien potential would be difficult for the U.S. and Puerto Rican authorities to explain, and has led to a disinformation program through which the government agencies disseminate the quote, already discredited official explanations of feral dogs, baboons, apes, and other exotic animals or satanic cults as those capable of these actions. This has been strengthened by certain, quote, media jokers who have sensationalized and made light of the situation. In many instances, ridicule has been used as a weapon against serious witnesses. Other disinformation and debunking campaigns appeared organized through UFO groups by the U.S. intelligence services. Serious investigators have had their credibility affected. At least 2 groups disseminate the information through the media, spreading panic as they tell of how the Chupacabras, or ABEs, belong to an alien race who, quote, created the AIDS virus to destroy the human race. Another body spread fear by explaining the Chupacabras belong to a voracious reptilian race of creatures, alien in origin, who have started devouring the populace. For our part, we have denounced their intent. It is clear that someone, apparently related to the intelligence community, intends to start a panic, whilst at the same time someone, for reasons unknown, is trying to prevent this alarming situation from reaching the serious parts of the media in the United States. On the one side, we have the bogus UFO investigation groups created by U.S. intelligence, that they're really on one here, like MUFON, like funded by the Rockefellers, like they're right, created by U.S. intelligence in Puerto Rico to disinform and intoxicate the media with ridiculous stories. Also, a crew from the U.S. TV show Inside Edition visited Puerto Rico to report on the Chupacabras, but it was obvious to everyone here that they were trying to ridicule one of the witnesses. Jose Soto, mayor of the town of Canovanas, had a serious argument with the producers, who also tried to ridicule him. Our organization was also subjected to silly questions. Apparently, they intend to air the show to discredit the situation and our research. This is not the first occasion that this particular program has affected the credibility of our study program. Many still remember the important UFO sightings in Fife County, Alabama, in 1990. The television program grossly ridiculed the witnesses and case files. This should alert investigators in the U.S. The events in Puerto Rico may provide good enough reasons for discussion and is too important to be kept hidden from the public. It says at the very bottom, U.S. researcher and television producer Linda Moulton Howe is now on the island investigating many of the reports. I would put her in the category of like UFO person that is like a kind of a vessel for like U.S. intelligence disinfo.
Yeah.
She's very much like, well, I forget what she was, like Project Serpo or something like that. Like she's bought onto a lot of like why, or she is like a poster child
Serpo
of
thing. Yeah.
like a UFO researcher that gets psyoped by the government because she has inside white hats are feeding her info all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So yeah. So you get a slightly different perspective from this this writing. You know, they're very hip to the idea that the U.S. government is doing a weird kind of shitcoat disinfo campaign to kind of hush up whatever this is and also push false narratives about it. And we don't know. I mean, the rumors of satanic cults, pretty interesting. But of course we know, Khalid, that no Satanist, especially in the 80s or 90s, like no self-avowed Satanist ever like ritualistically slaughtered animals or did something that we would consider actually bad, because actually they're the highest ethical agents.
They're the most ethical, the most moral people, and they're just exposing the hypocrisy of these so-called religious people, especially those fundies.
Those damn fundies. Yeah, but I think we'll get to that in just a minute.
Ignorant Pentecostals who saw the Chupacabra. I mean, it is interesting. Like, before we should move on, but before, like, it is interesting that like originally the Chupacabra was kind of seen as like this winged animal that had like feathers, and it is like very similar to the Mothman thing. Like as like kind of we don't really think of it as a winged creature like these days. You just think of it as like kind of like a hopping gray or like kind of a dog. But it is interesting that a lot of the earlier ones, because there is an animal that I learned about in researching for this called the nightjar, this bird. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
The nightjar is also known as the goat sucker, and it actually is in Aristotle's History of Animals.
Wow.
It is. It's there's a little passage about it that I don't know, like, So the goat sucker, as it is called, is a mountain bird, larger than a blackbird and less than a cuckoo. It lays 2 or not more than 3 eggs, and it is slothful in its disposition. It flies against the goats and sucks them, whence its name, the goat sucker. They say that when the udder has been sucked, so importantly, this goat sucker does not suck blood, it sucks milk from the goats. But it does harm the goats because it makes them blind.
Interesting.
And the bird is not quick-sighted by day, but it sees well at night. So it is interesting that, like, first of all, I find this like this is like a common thing with these kind of like sort of like myths or ideas about like whether it's like jinn or it's a cryptid or something like that. A lot of it kind of emanates from like livestock, like having weird things happen to them, and
that's true.
You think after all these years of agriculture, like people like would understand like what's normal. Like I always find it weird to feel like, well, these people just don't know that like this is a normal thing to happen to livestock, like, and they are attributing it to these birds. And it's like after all these years of agriculture, like we don't like understand like what is normal for livestock, and like farmers don't know like whether it's normal for like your goat's udder to do this or something.
Right. I think people who raise livestock generally know what's normal and not. Yeah.
Right. Like it's odd, but it is interesting that the idea of like some kind of goat sucking bird is actually like or a bird that like descends upon goats and like harms them in the night, maybe in a different way. I mean, obviously this kind of vampire stories, like vampires preying on livestock, is a common thing that you could obviously trace to Chupacabra too, but like the specific idea of like of a goat sucker, if not necessarily in the exact same way, that has existed for so long. And in fact, I did find this one article called the Prehistory of the Chupacabra that mentions that the name for this bird, the nightjar, in Spanish is Chotacabra. It's in the now obsolete Spanish form. It was in common use in Spanish America from at least the 19th century, changing to Chupacabra in the 20th century when the older Spanish term chotar became obsolete and gave way to the newer synonym chupar. So this was like a thing, but I guess kind of like maybe it fell out of use. And so his like notion is that somehow unconsciously this idea of there is this connection between the goat sucker that is mentioned by Aristotle and the Chupacabra goat sucker. He mentions a bunch of other things like In the Americas, we know the nightjar already had a sinister reputation before the Spanish conquest, at least in parts of South America. Among the Macusi in South America, for example, the nighttime cry of the goat sucker was believed to be the shriek of evil spirits. According to Claude Levi-Strauss, the goat sucker was the bird of death in Central and South America, and myths of its evil nature were widespread throughout the Americas. For example, among the Maya, they were the guardian birds of the underworld.
Interesting.
It is not entirely conjectural to suggest that the native and later Hispanic peoples of the Caribbean came to adopt a negative folkloric association of the goat sucker and all its vampiric glory from Spanish and Portuguese influences, probably in adopting a European language and European animal names, and combine them with indigenous ideas of the goat sucker as an evil demon. These two strands of goat sucker lore...
Yeah.
Oh, you're going to go to the bathroom. Yeah. These two strands of goat sucker lore neatly encapsulate everything the modern Chupacabra represents, a demonic creature that sucks the blood from animals. I guess I'll just read a little bit more from this article while Dimitri's gone. We know the term Chotacabras was in popular usage in Puerto Rico and was well understood because the Spanish translation of Oliver Wendell Holmes' Immortal Antipathy, 1885, translates the character Maurice Kirkwood's pseudonym, Sachem or Nighthawk, as El Chotacabras. And this translation appears as early as 1951 in the journal Asomante, published by the University of Puerto Rico. The term that appears in Spanish dictionaries in use in the region in the 19th century, term also appears in Spanish dictionaries in use in the region in the 19th century. In 1995, a myth to explain unexplained animal deaths and sightings of strange creatures could have taken many forms. Indeed, before the creature acquired a name, it was described as everything from a bird to a Bigfoot to a vampire. It was human-looking vampire. Its victims were everything from chickens to horses to cows, but only rarely goats. Many early attacks were specifically attributed to monstrous birds, including a wave of sightings in 1975. That's El Vampiro de Mocha. Among the victims in 1995 were 8 sheep, 3 roosters, and a teddy bear. During August 1995, 150 farm animals and pets were allegedly killed, with dozens of additional animals said to have been killed in November, among which were a few goats. Following Tolentino's sighting, the Chupacabra name was attached to the conjectured monster by Silverio Perez before the end of the year. It was the application of the specific name of goat sucker that helps define the direction of the story of the Chupacabra, would take. The bird for which it was named was rare. Most modern Puerto Ricans would not have seen one. It does not take much conjecture to suggest that the myths associated with the bird could therefore be transferred from the now rare and mostly forgotten avian to a cryptid that people believed really existed and did really exist. We contend. All right.
Oh, okay.
So,
I'm back.
Yeah.
So
all right.
It goes deep, but
we should switch over.
All right.
We're gonna be up till who knows.
We're gonna pivot now to round 2 today, which is going to be on patreon.com/subliminaljihad in just a few minutes, and then I think we're just gonna keep blowing through to part 3 once we're on that feed. So it will be a different stream. I think I have to end this one to start the next one. So I've posted the link in the chat here. It's also in the episode description. Come on by, because we're going to talk about, in the spirit of like favorite SJ subgenres, we're going church lady mode for part 2.
Yeah, we truly are.
And we are going to hector and censor and restrict free speech.
Yes.
By talking about
have a bee in our bonnet and whatever church ladies do.
Yes, about somebody who is also ascendant, just like the Chupacabra in 1995 and 1996. The king,
also a vampire,
the vampire Satanist, potentially government psyop, and in a way a product of the Phoenix program. Of course, we're talking about multi-platinum shock rocker recording artist Marilyn Manson. And I think it feels like with all the things going on right now that a little bit of deep dive into this big cultural figure. We brought him up briefly the other day, talking about his like interview and Bowling for Columbine and whatever. We'll probably touch on that again, but like how he became a heckin' free speech hero in the 2000s.
Yeah. He's an artist, man. He's an artist, all right? And like artists, do what they got to do. And like, sometimes you got to be a little bit crazy to create something as awesome as Antichrist or whatever.
Antichrist Superstar. Yeah. Sometimes you have to be damaged and be a a sex criminal, like Nazi
Right.
fetishist, like blah.
Yeah, I literally found like a clip of Joe Rogan saying that exact thing, that like, you know, if someone's gonna be crazy, yeah, like, someone's like gotta be, to make us all like the beautiful people, you gotta be a little bit crazy. Like if you want great art, like the beautiful people, you gotta be like, I'm like, all right, like this is like a whole. Anyway, we can talk about this in our.
We're gonna flip over, but yeah, maybe in the next 10 minutes we're gonna start talking about. We're talking about Manson and what does it say about our culture in the 90s that this person was like elevated to be like thrown, like basically blasted in front of like tweens and like 12 to 15-year-olds, and maybe how that's all panned out, that heckin' kind of Gen X, that being the highest virtue of all time. How did that jive with the neoliberal era? You know, I think we'll answer all those questions shortly. But you know, for those of you who aren't coming along, I mean, stay vigilant, but you honestly should, because you should. We're just getting started.
Yeah,
we're just getting started, folks. All right, we'll see you all in a second on patreon.com/subliminal jihad.